Welcome back to Haunted Fears, Washington State, where ancient forests hide the unthinkable, ferries carry passengers who've been dead for decades, and the darkness conceals horrors that refuse to stay buried. Tonight, we're exploring 11 encounters from across the Pacific Northwest that shattered the lives of those who experienced them. From haunted islands to abandoned asylums, from mysterious disappearances to things that followed people home, these accounts will change how you see this state forever. Each one left survivors questioning what's real and what lurks just beyond our understanding. Before we begin, if you're part of the Haunted Fears horror family, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying upload. And if you're brave enough to make it through all 11 stories tonight, drop a comment and tell me which one kept you up at night. Now, let's step into the shadows of Washington State and discover what's been waiting there all along. I couldn't see a ferry schedule anywhere, and the dock felt like it existed in some kind of void where time didn't matter anymore. The woman in the 1980s windbreaker was standing just 10 feet away now, staring at me with eyes that looked straight through me, and I realized with growing horror that I could see the railing behind her, right through her body. Let me back up and explain how I ended up on what I now call the ghost ferry of the San Juan Islands. My name is Kira, and I'm a hospice nurse working the late shift at Island Hospital in Anacortes. I've seen death more times than I can count, sat with families as their loved ones took their last breath, held hands with people in their final moments. I thought I understood what it meant to be close to the other side. I was wrong. What happened to me on the night of March 15th, 2019, taught me that the boundary between life and death isn't as solid as we'd like to believe. And sometimes that boundary exists in the most ordinary places, like the ferry crossing from Anacortes to Friday Harbor. It was just past 10 p.m. when I finished my shift. I'd been working a double because we were short-staffed, and I was exhausted in that bone-deep way where you feel like you're moving through water. My car was parked at the Anacortes ferry terminal because I live on San Juan Island, and I'd missed the 9:30 ferry by about 20 minutes. The terminal was mostly empty at that hour on a Thursday night in March, which isn't unusual. The tourist season hadn't started yet, and most locals had already made the crossing earlier in the evening. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, debating whether to just sleep there and catch the first morning ferry, or wait for what I thought would be the last crossing at 11:15. I checked the ferry schedule on my phone, but my service kept cutting out. The whole terminal had this weird dead zone for cell reception, which had always annoyed me. Eventually, I decided to go into the terminal building to check the posted schedule and maybe grab a terrible cup of coffee from the vending machine. The terminal building was dimly lit, and I didn't see anyone at the ticket counter. I walked up to the big schedule board, squinting at the times, when I heard the announcement over the loudspeaker. Now boarding for Friday Harbor. All passengers and vehicles, please proceed to the ferry. I looked at my watch, 10:47 p.m. That was odd because there wasn't supposed to be a ferry at this time, but I wasn't about to question my luck. Maybe they'd added an extra run, or maybe I'd misread the schedule. Either way, I hurried back to my car and drove toward the loading area. That's when I should have noticed the first sign that something was wrong, the ferry worker directing traffic onto the boat. I couldn't quite see his face. The way he moved his orange light sticks was mechanical, repetitive, like he'd done this exact motion a million times before. I called out, "Thank you," as I drove, past him, but he didn't react. Didn't nod, didn't wave, nothing. Just kept moving those light sticks in the same pattern. I parked my Honda on the car deck and headed upstairs to the passenger cabin. This is where things started to feel really off. The ferry looked old, not just weathered or in need of maintenance, but genuinely from another era. The seats were that particular shade of orange-brown that hasn't been used in interior design since the 1980s. The carpet had that geometric pattern that screamed early Reagan administration. Even the smell was wrong. a mix of diesel fuel, old cigarette smoke, despite ferries being non-smoking for decades, and something else I couldn't quite place, something stale and cold. There were maybe a dozen other passengers in the cabin, a couple sitting near the windows, a man in a business suit reading a newspaper, a woman in that windbreaker I mentioned, and a few others scattered around. None of them were looking at their phones. In 2019, on a ferry crossing, everyone is on their phone, checking emails, scrolling social media, playing games. But these people were just sitting there, staring ahead or looking out the windows at the darkness. The woman with the windbreaker had it zipped all the way up, and she wore her hair in a style I remembered from old photos of my mom from the 80s. Big, permed, with excessive hairspray. I sat down a few rows away from anyone else and tried to check my phone again. No service, which was normal for the crossing, but my battery was also draining incredibly fast. I'd charged it fully before leaving the hospital, and it had been at 87% when I got in my car. Now it was at 34% and dropping as I watched. The temperature was also dropping. I was wearing scrubs and a fleece jacket, but I started to feel genuinely cold, that penetrating, damp cold that gets into your bones. The ferry's horn sounded, and we started moving. Through the windows, I could see the lights of Anacortes fading behind us. The water looked unusually calm, almost glassy, and the fog was rolling in thick. I tried to relax, close my eyes, maybe catch a quick nap during the crossing. But I couldn't shake this feeling of wrongness that was growing stronger with every minute. About 10 minutes into the crossing, I noticed that the man with the newspaper hadn't turned a single page. He was just staring at it, not reading, not moving. The couple by the window sat with perfect stillness, their hands clasped together on the table between them. When I looked more carefully, I realized their hands were positioned in a way that looked almost staged, like a photograph. Nobody was blinking normally. Nobody was breathing in that natural, rhythmic way people breathe. That's when I saw the woman in the windbreaker stand up and walk toward me. Not directly at me, but past me, toward the rear of the cabin. As she passed under the fluorescent lights, I saw it. That translucent quality I mentioned. She wasn't solid. She was there, definitely there, but also somehow not entirely present. Like a photograph superimposed over reality. My heart started hammering. I stood up thinking I needed to get outside, get some air, clear my head. Maybe I was more exhausted than I'd thought. Maybe I was having some kind of episode from the stress of the double shift. I walked toward the door to the outside deck, and that's when things got worse. The door was stuck. I pulled hard, yanked on it, but it wouldn't budge. Through the window in the door, I could see the outside deck, and there were people standing out there. At least a dozen people, all lined up along the railing, all facing outward toward the dark water. They stood perfectly still, and they were all wearing clothes from different eras, 70s, 80s, 90s. None of them wore anything from this decade. I spun around, and every single passenger in the cabin was now looking directly at me. Not just looking, staring with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Their expressions were empty, hollow. The woman in the windbreaker was closest, and when she opened her mouth, no sound came out, but I could read her lips. "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I don't even remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was sprinting toward the stairwell, taking the steps down to the car deck 2 at a time. My breathing was ragged, panicked. I got to my car, fumbled with my keys, dropped them, picked them up, finally got the door open. I locked myself inside and sat there, shaking, trying to understand what I'd just seen. The crossing should take about an hour. I sat in my car, watching my watch, trying to calm down. But time felt wrong. Minutes stretched impossibly long, then suddenly snapped forward. My watch showed 10:52, then 10:53, then somehow it was 10:51. The numbers weren't moving in the right direction. Through my windshield, I could see other cars parked on the deck, an old station wagon that looked like it was from 1983, A sedan with pop-up headlights that stopped being manufactured in the early 90s. A pickup truck with a faded bumper sticker that said, "Re-elect Reagan 84. None of these were vehicles that should be on a ferry in 2019. And then suddenly we were docking. I heard the announcement, "Friday Harbor. All passengers please return to your vehicles," and felt the ferry bump against the dock. I started my engine immediately, hands still shaking. The car in front of me, that old station wagon, started rolling forward toward the exit. I followed, desperate to get off this boat. When I drove off the ferry onto the dock at Friday Harbor, I looked at my watch again. 11:02 p.m. The crossing had taken 15 minutes. 15 minutes. It's physically impossible to cross from Anacortes to Friday Harbor in 15 minutes. The distance is nearly 20 miles. Even at maximum speed, it takes at least 45 minutes. I pulled over in the ferry parking lot and sat there, trying to process what had happened. That's when I saw the ferry worker at the dock, a young guy I recognized named Lath, who'd worked there for years. I rolled down my window and called out to him, "Lath, hey, can I ask you something?" He walked over, looking concerned. "Kira, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "What ferry did I just get off?" I asked. He looked confused. "What do you mean? You're the only car that just came off. The last ferry from Anacortes doesn't arrive until 12:30. But I just got off a ferry. Right now. You saw me drive off." He shook his head slowly. "Kira, I've been standing here for 20 minutes. No ferry has docked. You just drove up from the parking lot." I looked back at where I'd come from. He was right. I was in the ferry parking lot, not at the dock. My car was parked in a spot, engine running, but I had no memory of parking it. The last thing I clearly remembered was driving onto a ferry in Anacortes at 10:47 p.m. Now it was 11:02 p.m. in Friday Harbor, and somehow I was here, but I'd never actually made the crossing. Lath looked really worried now. "Do you want me to call someone? Are you feeling okay?" I told him I was fine, just tired, and drove home. But I wasn't fine. I'm still not fine. Because when I got home and checked my phone, which had mysteriously recharged itself to 87%, I had a notification. A photo had been automatically uploaded to my cloud storage at 10:54 p.m. I don't remember taking any photos. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a picture of the passenger cabin on that ferry. Every seat was filled with people, dozens of them, all staring directly at the camera with those empty, hollow expressions. And in the front row, clear as day, was the woman in the windbreaker. Behind her, I could see the date on a newspaper someone was holding, March 15th, 1987, exactly 32 years before the night I took that ferry. I've never taken the late ferry again. I've asked other people who work at the hospital if they've ever experienced anything strange on the crossing, but nobody has, or if they have, they're not talking about it. I did some research, though, and I found something that made my blood run cold. On March 15th, 1987, there was a ferry accident near the San Juan Islands. A boat called the Lady of the Sound disappeared during a crossing. It left Anacortes at 10:45 p.m. and never arrived at Friday Harbor. Search teams found no wreckage, no survivors, no bodies. 17 passengers and 3 crew members just vanished. The case was never solved. Sometimes I wonder if I was actually on that ferry, the real one from 1987, or if something about the anniversary, the timing, the location created some kind of overlap between that night and this one. All I know for certain is that somewhere between Anacortes and Friday Harbor, there's a ferry that still runs. And if you're unlucky enough to board it, you'll find yourself with passengers who've been making that same crossing for over 30 years, stuck in a loop. They can't escape. I still live on San Juan Island. I still work as a hospice nurse, but now I make absolutely certain I catch the daytime ferries. And I never, ever work a double shift that would force me to take the late crossing. Because I know what's out there in the darkness of Puget Sound. I've seen it. And the worst part, The woman in the windbreaker looked exactly like the photo they showed on the news from 1987. Her name was Mariella Foster. She was 28 years old when she disappeared. And when she looked at me and said, "You shouldn't be here," I think she was trying to warn me. Because something about that ferry doesn't just carry the dead, it wants to keep them. And if I'd stayed on board, if I hadn't run back to my car, I might have become one of them. Another passenger on a ferry that never reaches its destination, making the same crossing over and over for eternity. The foreman's axe was still buried in the tree stump outside his trailer, dried blood covering the blade that I knew damn well hadn't been there when I'd walked past it that morning. I stood there in the pouring rain, my headlamp beam shaking as badly as my hands, realizing that the symbols carved into every tree around the perimeter of camp matched exactly the scars I'd just seen covering the foreman's chest. My name's Vihan, and I need to tell someone what happened at the Crescent Lake logging camp in October of 1997, even though I know most people won't believe me. I was 26 years old, broke as hell, and desperate for work when I took a seasonal job with Pacific Northwest Timber, cutting old growth near Forks on the Olympic Peninsula. The pay was good, really good actually, which should have been my first warning sign. Nobody pays above market rate for basic chainsaw work unless something's wrong. But I had child support to pay, an ex-wife who wouldn't let me see my daughter until I caught up on payments, and exactly $47 in my checking account. So when the recruiter at the unemployment office told me they needed experienced loggers for a 6-week contract at double the usual rate, I signed the papers without asking many questions. I should have asked questions. I should have asked why they were hiring in late October, when most camps were winding down for the winter. I should have asked why the recruiter wouldn't tell me the names of any of the other crew members. I should have asked why the camp location wasn't listed on any official Forest Service map. But I didn't ask, because I needed that money, and because I'm an idiot. The camp was 43 miles from Forks, down a logging road so overgrown it barely qualified as a road anymore. My truck bottomed out twice on the drive in, and by the time I arrived, it was getting dark. The camp itself was just 4 trailers arranged in a rough square around a central fire pit, with a larger equipment shed off to one side. There were 3 other guys already there, the foreman, whose name was Kane, and 2 workers named Dimitri and Ronnie. All of them had been there for 3 weeks already, and all of them looked like they hadn't slept properly in most of that time. Kane was maybe 50 years old, built like a bear, with a thick gray beard and eyes that never quite focused on you when he talked. He showed me to my trailer, a rusted-out single-wide with a propane heater that barely worked, and told me we'd start cutting at first light. "Stay in camp after dark," he said, which seemed like obvious advice until he added, "Don't go past the marked trees. Don't ask about the marks. Don't touch anything you find in the woods. You follow those rules, you'll get paid and go home in 6 weeks." I asked him what happens if I don't follow the rules. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "The last crew didn't follow the rules. That's why we're hiring." That first night, I barely slept. The rain hammered on the metal roof of the trailer, and the wind made the whole structure groan and shift. But worse than the rain and wind were the other sounds. Rhythmic, distant sounds that I couldn't quite identify. Chopping, maybe, or digging. At one point, I could have sworn I heard chanting, multiple voices speaking in unison. But when I looked out my window, the camp was dark and still. The work started before dawn. We were cutting old-growth Douglas fir, trees that had been standing for 300 or 400 years, and it was brutal, dangerous work. But what made it weird was the pattern. Kane would mark specific trees for us to cut, ignoring perfectly good timber in favor of trees that seemed randomly selected. And every single tree he marked had a symbol carved into the bark about 6 feet up, a circle with lines radiating out from it, like a crude sun or star. When I asked Dimitri about it during our lunch break, he just shook his head and said, "Don't ask about the marks." But I'm not good at following rules, especially rules that don't make sense. So that afternoon, while Ronnie was limbing a fallen tree and Dimitri was 50 yards away bucking another trunk into sections. I walked up to one of the marked trees and examined the symbol up close. It wasn't just carved into the bark. It was old, weathered, like it had been there for years. And when I touched it, the bark was warm. Not sun-warm, because we were deep in the rainforest, where sunlight barely penetrated. Warm, like something living. I pulled my hand back fast, and that's when I noticed them. More symbols, dozens of them, carved into trees all around the perimeter of our work area. They formed a rough circle, maybe a quarter-mile in diameter, with our camp at the center. And in the spaces between the symbols, hanging from branches, were objects. Bones tied together with wire, bundles of feathers wrapped in what looked like hair, small cloth bags that swayed in the wind despite being sheltered from the breeze. I told you not to ask about the marks. Kane's voice behind me nearly made me jump out of my skin. I spun around, and he was standing there with his axe in his hand, not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. "How long have those been there?" I asked, pointing at the symbols. "Long enough," he said. "The company knows about them. That's why we're here. Certain trees need to be taken in a certain order. We follow the marks, we do the cutting, we leave the offerings alone, and we all go home with our paychecks." Offerings. Who the hell are we making offerings to? Kane's expression went hard. That's exactly the kind of question the last crew asked. Right before, 3 of them disappeared, and the other 2 had to be hospitalized. You want to know what's in those woods past the marked trees? You want to find out what happens when you break the pattern? Go ahead. Take a walk past the perimeter. But don't expect anyone to come looking for you when you don't come back. He walked away, leaving me standing there with my chainsaw in my hands and a cold feeling spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the October air. I should have left right then, should have packed my truck and driven out, even if it meant not getting paid. But I didn't because I'm stubborn, and because some part of me didn't believe him. Symbols carved in trees. Offerings. This was 1997, not the Dark Ages. There had to be a rational explanation. I decided to find out that night. After dinner, canned chili heated over the fire pit, while Kane, Dimitri, and Ronnie sat in silence, not talking, not joking, not doing any of the normal things loggers do. I waited until everyone had gone to their trailers. Then I grabbed my headlamp and a flashlight and walked toward the perimeter. The symbols were easier to see in the dark because someone, at some point, had painted them with something that held a faint luminescence. They glowed a dim, sickly green in my headlamp beam, and up close, I could see that they weren't all the same. Some had additional marks, smaller symbols inside the circles, variations on the pattern. The offerings hung between them like decorations on some nightmare Christmas tree. I picked one of the gaps between symbols and stepped past the perimeter line. Nothing happened. No lightning strike, no sudden appearance of forest monsters, nothing. Just more rainforest, more ferns, more moss-covered trees. I felt stupid for being so nervous. This was clearly some kind of local superstition that Kane had bought into, probably because he'd been in the woods too long. I walked maybe 50 yards past the perimeter, my headlamp cutting through the darkness, rain dripping from the canopy above. That's when I found the first camp. Not our camp, another one, older. 2 trailers, both collapsed and covered in moss. Equipment scattered around, chainsaws rusted into uselessness. A truck with trees growing through the engine compartment. And carved into every visible surface, the trailers, the truck, the equipment, were those symbols. Hundreds of them, thousands, carved frantically, desperately, like whoever had been here had been trying to protect themselves from something. I moved closer to one of the collapsed trailers and shined my light inside. There were bones. Human bones, I was pretty sure, though I'm not an expert. A skull, definitely human, lying on what used to be a bunk. Rib bones scattered across the floor, and on the wall above the bunk, scratched into the metal in letters 6 inches high, "The trees take their price." That's when I heard it. That rhythmic sound I'd heard the first night, but closer now, much closer. Chopping, digging, and underneath it, that chanting. Multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. Words I didn't recognize in a language I'd never heard. The sound was coming from deeper in the forest, past the abandoned camp. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run back to camp, but I couldn't. I had to know. I followed the sound, moving as quietly as I could through the underbrush until I saw light ahead. Firelight flickering between the trees. I crept closer and looked into a clearing I hadn't known existed. There were maybe 20 people there, all dressed in loggers' work clothes from different eras. Some looked current, but others wore styles from the 70s, 60s, even earlier. They stood in a circle around a massive tree stump, and they were carving symbols into it in perfect synchronization, their axes rising and falling in rhythm while they chanted. And standing in the center of the circle, directing them like a conductor, was Cain. But not the Cain I'd met. This Cain had his shirt off, and his entire torso was covered in those symbols, carved directly into his flesh. Old scars and fresh wounds, overlapping, covering every inch of skin. His eyes were rolled back in his head, showing only whites, and his mouth moved with the chant, but his voice sounded like dozens of voices speaking at once. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a footstep, something, because every single person in that clearing stopped moving and turned to look directly at where I was hiding. And in the firelight, I could see that their faces were wrong, sunken, desiccated, like corpses that had been in the ground for weeks but were somehow still moving. And they all had the same symbols carved into their exposed skin. I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was crashing through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly. Behind me, I could hear them coming, crashing through the undergrowth, that chanting getting louder, closer. I ran toward where I thought the camp was, praying I was going the right direction, because in the dark and the rain and the panic, I had no idea where I was. I broke through into the camp clearing, sprinting toward my truck. That's when I saw Dimitri and Ronnie standing by the fire pit, both of them with axes in their hands, both of them just staring at me with dead, empty expressions. I realized then that they were already part of it, already lost. How long had they been part of this? Days, weeks, since the beginning? I didn't stop. I ran straight to my truck, yanked the door open, fumbled my keys into the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try, thank God for small favors. And I threw it in reverse, not bothering with headlights, just backing up until I could turn around. Dimitri and Ronnie didn't try to stop me. They just watched as I fish-tailed out of camp and onto that overgrown logging road, my truck's undercarriage scraping on rocks and logs as I drove faster than was even remotely safe. I made it maybe 3 miles before I saw Cain's truck blocking the road. He was standing in front of it, still shirtless despite the cold rain, those symbols on his chest glistening wet and dark. I didn't slow down. I swerved into the trees, praying I wouldn't hit anything big enough to stop me, branches scraping paint off both sides of my truck as I forced my way past. In my rear-view mirror, I saw him just standing there, watching me go, not chasing, not angry, just watching. It took me 2 hours to find my way back to a paved road. My truck was a wreck, dents, scratches, one headlight smashed, but it was still running. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in Forks and told them everything. They took a report, but I could see in their eyes that they didn't believe me. They said they'd send someone to check out the camp, but I never heard anything back. When I called a week later, they told me there was no logging operation registered at those coordinates, no permits filed, no company listed. I never got paid for those 2 days of work. The company that supposedly hired me, Pacific Northwest Timber, doesn't exist. There's no record of it ever existing. The recruiter at the unemployment office claimed she never sent me to any logging job. My paperwork, my contract, all of it just vanished like it had never existed. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there in those woods near forks, in places the maps don't show. There are camps that need loggers, camps that have needed loggers for decades, maybe longer, and the trees take their price, one way or another. Either you become part of the ritual, carving those symbols, making those offerings, or you become the offering yourself. I never worked another logging job, couldn't bring myself to go back into the deep woods, couldn't stand the sound of chainsaws, couldn't look at Douglas fir trees without seeing those symbols. I work construction now, urban stuff, nothing further from civilization than the suburbs. My ex-wife never did let me see my daughter regularly, but honestly, I'm glad, because I don't know if whatever I saw in those woods can follow you, can mark you, can make you part of it even if you got away. Sometimes I dream about that clearing, about Cain standing there with those symbols carved into his skin, about the dead-eyed loggers carving into that stump in perfect rhythm. And in the dreams, I'm always walking toward them, my shirt already off, an axe already in my hand, ready to add my own marks to my own skin and join the endless work. I wake up sweating, checking my chest for new scars, terrified that one morning I'll find those symbols there, burned or carved into my flesh while I slept. So far, my skin is clean, but I know that doesn't mean I'm safe. The trees take their price, always, and I'm still waiting to find out what mine will be. If you're ever offered a logging job with unusually good pay in the Olympic Peninsula near Forks, at a camp location that's not on the maps, don't take it. No amount of money is worth what's waiting for you out there in the dark, in the rain, in the places where the old growth still stands and the old ways still have power. Some forests don't want to be cut, and some of them know exactly how to make sure the cutting happens in the right way, in the right pattern, forever. The hiker's footprints ended at the cliff edge, perfectly preserved in 6 inches of fresh snow. But when I looked over the 1,000-foot drop, there was nothing. No body, no blood, no disturbed snow on the rocks below. I radioed dispatch 3 times asking what year it was, because the man I'd just been talking to had been wearing a jacket with a 1987 Winter Olympics patch. And when I asked him the date, he'd looked at me with pure confusion and said, February 9th, 1987. My name is Liberty Kane, and I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 15 years. I've dealt with lost hikers, bear encounters, hypothermia cases, and more stupid tourist decisions than I can count. I've pulled bodies out of crevasses and talked people down from suicide attempts. I thought I'd seen everything the mountain could throw at me. But what happened on Hurricane Ridge during the snowstorm of January 14th, 2019, showed me that sometimes the mountain doesn't just take people. Sometimes it keeps them, trapped in moments that happened decades ago, walking the same trails over and over while the rest of the world moves on without them. That night started routine enough. We'd had a massive storm system moving in from the Pacific, and the forecast called for 2 feet of snow and whiteout conditions above 5,000 feet. Hurricane Ridge sits at 5,242 feet, and the road up to the visitor center is 17 miles of switchbacks that become a death trap in winter conditions. Our protocol is simple. Close the road before the storm hits, do a final sweep to make sure nobody's still up there, then head down and wait it out. I drew the short straw for the final sweep. It was just after 6 p.m., already full dark, and the first bands of the storm were moving in. The wind was gusting to 50 miles per hour, and the temperature had dropped to -10. I took one of our trucks, a heavy-duty Ford, with chains and enough emergency gear to survive a week if I got stuck, and started the drive up from the Port Angeles Ranger Station. The road was already getting bad. Snow was accumulating fast, and visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet in my headlights. I had the radio on, checking in with dispatch every 10 minutes. Ridge 1 to base, passing mile marker 7, conditions deteriorating. Ridge 1 to base, mile marker 12, wind gusts making steering difficult. Standard check-ins, keeping them informed following protocol. I reached the Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center parking lot at 7:23 p.m. The lot was supposed to be empty. We'd closed the road at 4 p.m. and done an initial sweep at 5. But there was a car there, a Honda Civic, covered in snow, parked in the far corner of the lot. I pulled up next to it and got out, my headlamp beam cutting through the horizontal snow. The car was running. I could see exhaust coming from the tailpipe, could hear the engine idling, but I couldn't see anyone inside because the windows were completely frosted over. I knocked on the driver's window. "Park ranger, we've got a storm coming in. You need to head down the mountain now." No response. I knocked harder, then tried the door. Locked. I cleared some of the frost off the window with my gloved hand and shined my light inside. Empty. The car was completely empty. Engine running, heater on full blast, but no driver, no passengers, nothing. I checked the back seat. Empty. Checked the trunk through the rear window. Empty. Just an empty running car in a parking lot that should have been cleared 3 hours ago. That's when I saw the footprints. A single set of tracks leading from the driver's door across the parking lot toward the Cirque Rim Trail. Fresh tracks, maybe 20 minutes old based on how much snow had accumulated in them. Someone had gotten out of that car recently and walked into a blizzard at night, in sub-zero temperatures, on one of the most dangerous trails in the park. I radioed it in. "Ridge 1 to base. I have an abandoned vehicle with fresh tracks leading onto Cirque Rim Trail. Beginning search and rescue protocol." Dispatch responded immediately. "Ridge 1, conditions are too dangerous for solo search. Return to base, and we'll send a team at first light." But we both knew that anyone caught on that trail in these conditions wouldn't survive until first light. I had maybe an hour, 2 at most, to find whoever had left those tracks. I grabbed my emergency pack, thermal blanket, extra layers, first aid kit, rope, flares, and followed the footprints into the storm. The Cirque Rim Trail follows the edge of a massive glacial cirque, with stunning views during the day and deadly drop-offs if you step wrong. At night, in a blizzard, it's suicidal. The tracks led straight up the trail, not wavering, not hesitant. Whoever I was following seemed to know exactly where they were going. I pushed forward, my headlamp beam barely penetrating the curtain of snow. The wind was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. Not my own breathing, not my boots crunching in the snow, nothing but that constant roar. The tracks continued steady and determined, leading higher up the ridge. Then I saw him. A figure standing about 50 yards ahead, right at the edge of the cliff where the trail makes a sharp turn. He was facing away from me, looking out over the drop into absolute darkness. He wasn't wearing proper winter gear, just jeans, hiking boots, and that jacket with the 1987 Olympics patch. No hat, no gloves. He should have been dead from exposure. "Hey!" I shouted over the wind. "Sir, you need to come with me right now. This storm—" He turned around, and I stopped mid-sentence. His face was pale, but not from cold. Pale like he'd never seen sun, and his expression was confused, disoriented, like he'd just woken up and didn't know where he was. "What's the date?" he asked. Not, "Who are you?" or "Where am I?" but "What's the date?" "January 14th, 2019, I said, moving closer slowly. "Sir, we need to get you off this mountain. You're going to freeze to death up here." He shook his head. "That's not right. It's February 9th, 1987. I was hiking. The weather was clear. There was another ranger. She told me the trail was closed, but I thought I could make it to the summit and back before dark." He looked around, seeing the blizzard like it was the first time he'd noticed it. "Where did this storm come from?" I'd dealt with hypothermia-induced confusion before, but this was different. This was too specific, too detailed. "Sir, what's your name?" Marcus Adler. "I'm from Port Townsend. I just graduated from UW last year. I wanted to celebrate by doing the Ridge Trail." He looked at me with growing panic. "Why are you dressed like that? Your uniform is all wrong. Rangers don't wear those patches. And what is that light on your head? What kind of flashlight is that?" My blood went cold, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. I keyed my radio. "Ridge 1 to base. I need you to check something. Do we have any record of a Marcus Adler, Possible missing person from 1987. Static then. Ridge 1, please repeat. Signal is breaking up. Marcus Adler, February 1987. Check the records. More static, then broken words. Checking. Wait. Yes, we have. Marcus Adler, reported missing February 9th, 1987, or never found. The figure in front of me was starting to flicker, like a bad TV signal. One moment, he was solid. The next, I could see the snow falling through him. I don't understand, he said, his voice sounding farther away even though he hadn't moved. I was just hiking. Why can't I remember getting down the mountain? I keep starting the trail, but I never finish it. Every time I try to leave, I end up back at the same spot. How long have I been here? 32 years, I whispered. He looked at his hands, watching them fade in and out of existence. I'm dead, aren't it? I died on this mountain, February 9th, 1987. I must have gotten caught in a storm, got disoriented, went over the edge. He turned back toward the cliff. I can't even remember falling. Marcus, don't. But he was already walking toward the drop-off, his footprints appearing in the snow and then disappearing a moment later. I ran after him, but when I reached the cliff edge, he was gone. Just those footprints, ending at the precipice, exactly like I described at the beginning. I looked over the edge with my headlamp, scanning the rocks below. Nothing. No body, no disturbance in the snow, nothing to indicate anyone had fallen. And when I looked back at the footprints, they were fading, filling with snow, erasing themselves like they'd never existed. My radio crackled. Ridge 1, did you copy? We have a record of Marcus Adler, age 22, disappeared February 9th, 1987, while hiking Hurricane Ridge. His car was found in the parking lot, engine running, but he was never located. Search was called off after 2 weeks. He's presumed to have fallen, but no body was ever recovered. Why are you asking? About a 32-year-old cold case. I stood there, at the cliff edge, wind screaming around me, staring at footprints that were rapidly disappearing. Because I just talked to him. He's still here. He's been hiking the same trail for 32 years, trying to get back down, never realizing he died decades ago. Long silence on the radio. Then, Ridge 1, you need to come down now. The storm is getting worse. You're not making sense. You might be experiencing altitude-related confusion. But I wasn't confused. I knew what I'd seen. And as I turned to head back to my truck, I saw them. Dozens of sets of footprints, all leading up various trails, all disappearing into the storm. Fresh prints that couldn't have been there before. And standing at the trailheads, barely visible through the snow, were figures. Men and women in outdated clothing, all looking lost and confused, all starting to walk up trails they'd walked before, maybe hundreds of times, trapped in loops they couldn't break. I ran back to the truck, no longer following my own tracks, just running blind through the storm. I didn't stop until I was inside the cab with the doors locked. Engine started, heater blasting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I radioed dispatch and told them I was coming down, that the lot was clear, which was a lie because that Honda Civic was still there, still running. But I knew now that if they sent someone else up to deal with it, they wouldn't find anything either. The drive down was a nightmare. The storm had intensified, and I could barely see the road. But worse than the visibility was what I kept seeing in my peripheral vision. Figures standing beside the road, watching me pass. People who shouldn't be there, couldn't be there, all wearing clothes from different decades, all with that same lost, confused expression. I made it to the ranger station at 9:47 p.m. My supervisor took one look at me and put me on administrative leave, pending a psychological evaluation. He said I was clearly suffering from exposure and stress. But I know what I saw. I know who I talked to. I did my own research afterward. Checked the records, going back decades. Since 1957, 43 people have disappeared on Hurricane Ridge. 43 people who went hiking and never came back. Their cars found in parking lots. Their bodies never recovered. The official explanation is always the same. fell, likely swept away by avalanche or carried off by animals. But now I know the truth. They didn't fall. Or maybe they did, but they didn't die. Not completely. They're still there, trapped on that mountain, walking the same trails, experiencing the same moments over and over. Time doesn't work right up there. The mountain holds on to them, keeps them, makes them part of its permanent landscape. I requested a transfer 3 months later. I couldn't keep working at Olympic knowing what I knew, seeing what I'd seen. My supervisor approved it, without argument. I think he was glad to get rid of me, glad to not have to deal with the crazy ranger who claimed she'd talked to ghosts on Hurricane Ridge. I work at North Cascades now, different mountains, different trails, but sometimes, on clear nights, I think about Marcus Adler, still hiking that trail, still trying to get back to his car, still asking what year it is. And I think about the others, all those missing hikers, all those unsolved disappearances. How many of them are still up there, still walking, still searching for a way down that doesn't exist? If you ever visit Hurricane Ridge, pay attention to the weather warnings. Follow the closure notices. Don't be the idiot who thinks they can beat the storm, or squeeze in one last hike before dark. Because if something happens to you up there, if you get disoriented, or take a wrong step, or just plain disappear, you might not die. You might end up like Marcus Adler, like those 42 others, trapped in an endless loop of the worst moment of your life, hiking the same trail forever while decades pass, and the world forgets you were ever there. I still have nightmares about those footprints ending at the cliff edge, about Marcus's face when he realized he'd been dead for 32 years, about all those figures in the storm, all those lost souls still walking trails they can never finish. The mountain doesn't just take people, it keeps them. And once it has you, once you're part of its collection, there's no rescue coming. No one can bring you home. You're just another ghost on another trail, fading a little more with each passing year until you're nothing but footprints in the snow that no one can explain. Hurricane Ridge is open to visitors now. They rebuilt the visitor center, improved the road, added better warning systems. But on storm nights, when the wind is howling and the snow is coming down in sheets, the rangers still find cars in the parking lot, with engines running and no drivers. They still find fresh footprints leading up trails that should be empty. They still get reports from hikers who swear they saw people in outdated clothing standing by the cliff edges asking what year it is. The official policy now is to not engage. If you see someone who doesn't look right, someone in the wrong clothes asking strange questions, you're supposed to note their location and report it when you get back down. But you're not supposed to approach them. You're not supposed to try to help them. Because they're beyond help. They've been beyond help for years, maybe decades. They're just echoes now, recordings playing on an endless loop, and the mountain that holds them isn't letting go. I learned that the hard way on January 14th, 2019, and I've been trying to forget it ever since, even though I know I never will. Some things you see stay with you forever, burned into your memory like scars. Marcus Adler's face when he realized he was dead. Those footprints ending at nothing, all those figures in the storm, walking toward destinations they'll never reach. The mountain keeps them, and someday it might keep you too. Bro, this place is fucking insane. D'Angelo's voice echoed down from somewhere above me. But I couldn't tell which floor anymore, because every staircase I climbed just led me back to the same hallway, the same peeling walls, the same basement level I'd been trying to escape for the last hour. The beam from my dying flashlight caught something scratched into the wall. Tally marks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, covering every inch of the concrete, like someone had spent years down here counting days that never ended. Look, I'm not going to pretend this was some noble exploration or historical documentation. We broke into Northern State Hospital in Sedro-Woolley because we were bored college kids who thought abandoned asylums were cool and wanted footage for D'Angelo's YouTube channel. This was September 2003, before everyone and their grandma was doing urban exploration videos. when you could still find places that hadn't been picked clean by Instagram influencers. We were idiots. All four of us, me, Neo, D'Angelo, his girlfriend Raina, and my roommate Case. Stupid kids with flashlights and a video camera looking for ghosts and good content. The hospital had closed in 1976 after decades of horror stories about patient abuse and experimental treatments. By 2003, it was just a cluster of decaying brick buildings on the edge of Cedro Woolley, surrounded by a chain-link fence with no trespassing signs every 10 feet. The fence had holes. We found one behind the maintenance building and squeezed through around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. The place was massive. Multiple buildings connected by underground tunnels, each one more decrepit than the last. Broken windows, collapsed roofs, graffiti covering the walls, the usual abandoned building stuff. We'd brought bolt cutters for the locks, but most doors were already open, kicked in by previous explorers. We split up almost immediately, which I know is the first rule you're supposed to break in horror movies, but we weren't thinking about horror movies. We were thinking about getting different angles for the video, covering more ground, finding the creepiest rooms. D'Angelo and Raina took the main administration building. Casey wanted to check out the old cafeteria, where supposedly there'd been a riot in 1968. That left me with the patient housing building, a 3-story brick structure that still had beds and some rooms, restraints hanging from walls. All that genuinely disturbing asylum stuff that makes good footage. I had my mag light and a crappy handheld camera, and I was narrating as I went, doing my best horror documentary voice. This is the patient housing wing of Northern State Mental Hospital, closed in 1976 after reports of patient mistreatment, and I stopped because I'd found the stairs to the basement, and the door was wide open, which was weird because every other basement door we'd seen that night had been welded shut. The state had sealed most of the underground areas because of asbestos and structural damage. But this one was open, and I could see light down there. Not flashlight beams or street light coming through windows. This was different. Flickering, yellowish, like candles or old electric lights struggling to stay on. I should have gone to find the others. Should have at least radioed them on the walkie-talkies we'd brought. But I was 23 years old and convinced I was invincible, so I went down the stairs. The basement was cold. Not just regular cold, meat locker cold, the kind of cold that makes your breath come out in thick clouds and seeps through your jacket like it's not even there. The hallway was lined with doors, all of them open, leading to small rooms that looked like cells. Some still had furniture, metal bed frames bolted to the floor, toilets with no seats, those observation windows with wire mesh in the glass. The light was coming from deeper in, past all the cells, from what looked like a communal room at the end of the hall. I walked toward it, camera running, flashlight sweeping back and forth. That's when I heard the whispers. Not one voice, but dozens, maybe hundreds, all whispering at once. I couldn't make out words, just this constant susurrus of voices, overlapping, rising and falling like waves. And they were saying my name. Neo, 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 over and over, in perfect unison. My skin went cold. Nobody down here knew my name. Nobody down here should have been able to know my name. I spun around, shining my light back down the hallway, and every single cell door was now closed. Doors that had been open 30 seconds ago were now shut tight, and through the observation windows, I could see faces pressed against the glass. Pale faces, sunken eyes, mouths moving in time with the whispers. Neo, Neo, Neo. I ran toward the stairs. Didn't think, just ran. But when I got to where the staircase should have been, there was just wall. Solid concrete wall, no door, no stairs, nothing. I pounded on it, screaming for D'Angelo, for Case, for anyone. My voice echoed weirdly, like the space was bigger than it should be, and the whispers got louder, more insistent. Neo, Neo, Neo. I tried the radio. Guys, I'm stuck in the basement. I can't find the stairs. Something's static. Just harsh, crackling static that hurt my ears. Through the static, I could barely hear D'Angelo's voice. "Can't find you. Where? Signal breaking." Then nothing. Dead air. The radio was completely silent, and my flashlight started flickering. Not dying. The batteries had been fresh, but flickering like something was interfering with it. The bulb would dim, brighten, dim again, and in the moments of darkness, I could see shapes moving in the cells, pressing against the doors, trying to get out. I picked a direction and ran, past the cells, toward where that light had been coming from, because there had to be another exit, another staircase, something. The hallway seemed longer than it had before, stretching, impossibly far, but I kept running until I reached the communal room at the end. It was full of restraint chairs, 20 of them, arranged in neat rows, all facing the same direction like they were watching something. And sitting in each chair was a person. Patients, I guess, though calling them people felt wrong because they were so still, so perfectly motionless, like mannequins or corpses propped up for display. They wore hospital gowns from decades ago, and their skin had that waxy, preserved look you see in old photographs. Every single one of them turned their head to look at me. In perfect synchronization, 20 heads swiveling, 20 pairs of eyes locking onto mine. Then they spoke, all at once, in voices that sounded like they were coming from the bottom of a well. "You're one of us now. You're one of us now. You're one of us now." I backed out of the room, my camera still recording, but my hands shaking so badly the footage must have been unwatchable. I backed into the hallway, and that's when I saw it. Another staircase, on the opposite end from where I'd come down. A way out. I sprinted for it, not looking back, not caring about anything except getting up those stairs. But the stairs were wrong. I climbed and climbed, counting floors in my head. First floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Except the building only had 3 floors above ground. I kept climbing. 5th floor, 6th, 7th, and every landing looked identical to the last. The same peeling paint, the same water damage, the same smell of mold and decay. I stopped climbing and tried going down instead. Down 2 flights, 3 flights, 4, and I was back in the basement hallway. The exact same hallway. The exact same cells with faces pressed against the windows. Neo, Neo, Neo. I tried different staircases, found 5 different stairwells, tried each one going up and down, but they all led to the same 2 places. The basement hallway, or a landing that looked identical to all the other landings. No first floor. No exit. No way out. My flashlight was almost dead now, the beam fading to a dull orange glow. My phone had no signal, wasn't even picking up D'Angelo's walkie-talkie anymore. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m. I'd been down here for almost 4 hours, or had I? My watch showed 3:47, but my phone showed 11:34 p.m. The camera's timestamp said 2:19 a.m. Every device I had showed a different time, and none of them were moving forward. The seconds didn't tick. The minutes didn't change. Time had stopped, or broken, or become meaningless in this place. I sat down in one of the hallways, my back against the wall, trying to think. The whispers had stopped, which somehow made it worse. The silence was complete, oppressive, like being underwater or buried alive. I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, nothing else. I pulled out my camera and watched the footage I'd shot, trying to orient myself, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. The footage showed everything I remembered. The cells, the faces, the communal room with the restraint chairs. But it showed something else, too. In every frame, visible in mirrors or reflective surfaces, or just at the edges of the shot, there was a figure following me. A tall, thin figure in a white coat, with no face, just smooth skin where features should have been. And in every frame, it was getting closer. I turned off the camera. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to know where it was now. Didn't want to confirm that it might be standing right behind me, just outside the beam of my dying flashlight. That's when I heard footsteps. Real footsteps. Not whispers or supernatural bullshit, but actual boots on concrete. And voices. D'Angelo's voice, calling my name. "Neo, Neo, where the fuck are you, man?" I jumped up, screaming back. "I'm here, in the basement. I can't find the stairs." The voices got closer, and suddenly D'Angelo and Casey were there, their flashlights blinding me. They grabbed my arms, pulled me toward yet another staircase I hadn't noticed, and we climbed. One flight, and we were on the first floor, right there. The exit was 50 feet away, the door standing open, moonlight streaming in. We ran, didn't talk, didn't stop to grab our gear, just ran out of that building, through the hole in the fence, to where we'd parked D'Angelo's car half a mile away. It wasn't until we were on the highway, doing 70 toward Seattle, that anyone spoke. "Where the hell were you?" D'Angelo asked. "We looked for like 10 minutes, couldn't find you, figured you'd gone back to the car." 10 minutes? I was down there for hours. Look at my footage, look at the timestamp. But when I checked the camera, there was nothing. No footage from the basement, no cells, no restraint room, nothing. Just static. 3 hours and 47 minutes of white noise and visual snow. My phone showed 12:12 a.m. My watch showed 11:59 p.m. We'd only been in the hospital for 45 minutes total. Case looked pale. "Dude, when we found you, you were just standing in the middle of a room on the first floor. Not moving, not responding, eyes open, but nobody home. We had to shake you for like a minute before you even reacted." "What room?" "Old therapy room or something. It was empty except..." He trailed off. "Except what?" "Except for this chair in the middle. Restraint chair, like the old kind they used to strap people into. And, dude..." He pulled out his own camera and showed me a photo. It was me, standing next to that chair, and carved into the wall behind me were tally marks, thousands of them. And underneath, in letters a foot high, Neo, 347 NAC. I never went into another abandoned building. Deleted my YouTube channel. Stopped talking to D'Angelo and Raina because they wanted to go back and figure out what happened. Case understood. He'd seen my face in that photo, seen how wrong I looked, like I was somewhere else even though my body was standing right there. Sometimes I still lose time. I'll be doing something normal, washing dishes, watching TV, walking to class. And suddenly 3 hours have passed, and I don't remember any of it. And when I come back to myself, I can hear them whispering. Faint, like they're far away, but getting closer. Neo. 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 I looked into Northern States history. Found records of a patient named Neoma Vasquez, admitted 1953. Diagnosis schizophrenia. Underwent experimental electroshock therapy. She died in 1959, but the official cause of death is redacted. Her last known location in the hospital. Basement restraint room, Building C. The room where they found me. I think I met her down there, or became her, or somehow swapped places with her for 3 hours and 47 minutes. I think that's what the basement does. It collects people, stores them, adds them to its inventory of trapped souls. And once you're on its list, once it knows your name, it can call you back anytime it wants. I still have the camera. Haven't watched that static footage all the way through because I'm terrified of what might be hidden in the noise. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it playing. The camera's in a box in my closet, batteries removed, but I hear the static coming from it anyway. And under the static, voices whispering in unison, counting up from 0. 3 hours, 47 minutes, 0 seconds. 3 hours, 47 minutes, 1 second. 3 hours, 47 minutes, 2 seconds. Counting toward something. Some moment when the number reaches whatever threshold it needs, and I'll be back in that basement permanently, sitting in one of those restraint chairs, watching the next idiot explorer stumble into the room while I whisper their name over and over, until they become part of the collection too. Northern State Hospital was demolished in 2008. They knocked down every building, filled in the basements with concrete, built a golf course, and some nice condos on the property. But I've driven past there. On certain nights, when the fog is thick, you can see lights in the basement windows of buildings that don't exist anymore. And if you stop your car and listen, really listen, you can hear the whispers. Hundreds of names being repeated endlessly. A roster of everyone the hospital collected over the decades. My name is on that list now, and I'm terrified that one day I'll hear it call loud enough that I won't be able to ignore it. And I'll drive to Cedro Woolley and walk onto that golf course and somehow find my way back down to that basement that officially doesn't exist. And this time there won't be anyone to pull me back out. The basement has me marked, and it's patient. It can wait. The woman was already falling when I hit the brakes, her body arcing backward over the railing in slow motion, arms spread wide like she was embracing the 180-foot drop to the black water below. Then she stopped midair, hung there, suspended for 3 impossible seconds, and floated back up to standing position on the bridge's edge like someone had hit rewind on a video. Carter Silva, 35 years old, been driving long-haul trucks for 12 years. Seattle to Bellingham, route 3 times a week. This was March 7th, 2002, and I'd crossed Deception Pass Bridge hundreds of times. Day, night, rain, shine, didn't matter. Just another stretch of road connecting Whidbey Island to Fidalgo Island, 976 feet of steel and concrete spanning a channel where the tidal currents run so violent they've claimed dozens of lives over the decades. Beautiful during the day, unsettling at night, but never supernatural. Not until that night. I was running late on a delivery, pushing it to make a 4 a.m. drop-off in Bellingham. The bridge was empty. Nobody crosses Deception Pass at 3 a.m. on a weeknight unless they have to. Visibility was shit, fog rolling in off Puget Sound so thick my headlights barely cut through it. Wind was hammering the truck hard enough that I had to fight the steering wheel to keep from drifting lanes. That's when I saw her in my high beams. Woman in her 30s, maybe, standing on the outer edge of the pedestrian walkway, on the wrong side of the railing, wearing a dress that looked soaking wet even though it wasn't raining. Her hair was plastered to her face, and even from inside the cab I could see her skin had that bloated, waterlogged look. She was facing the water, swaying in the wind, clearly about to jump. I slammed the brakes, hazard lights on, didn't even think about it. You see someone about to kill themselves, you stop. That's just what you do. I jumped out of the cab, wind nearly knocking me sideways, and ran toward her. Hey, don't move, I'm coming. She turned her head toward me, and that's when I saw her face clearly. Jesus Christ, her face, pale as paper, lips purple-blue, eyes clouded over, white like a dead fish, and her mouth, when she opened it, water poured out. Not like she was spitting or vomiting, but pouring like someone had left a faucet running inside her throat. Seawater, by the smell of it. That sharp salt and rot stench. Did you come to jump too? Her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater, garbled and distant. It doesn't hurt. The fall doesn't hurt. It's the water that... She stopped mid-sentence, tilted her head, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear, and then she fell backward. I screamed, running forward, but there was nothing I could do. She went over the edge, arms out, that wet dress billowing around her. I got to the railing and looked down, expecting to see her body hit the water or hear the splash. But she just stopped. Hung there, in midair, 180 feet above the churning. Black current suspended like gravity had forgotten about her. Then she started floating upward. Not climbing, not being pulled. Floating. Like a video running in reverse. Up and up until she was standing on the bridge edge again, in the exact same position, swaying in the exact same way. She turned to me again. Did you come to jump too? Same words, same tone, water pouring from her mouth in the same pattern. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the... It doesn't hurt. The fall doesn't hurt. It's the water that... Again, she stopped mid-sentence, tilted her head, fell backward. I watched the whole thing repeat. The fall, the suspension, the floating back up. She was on a loop, I realized, jumping over and over. Maybe had been jumping for hours, days, years, stuck in the moment of her suicide forever. I turned to run back to my truck, and that's when I saw the others. 6 more of them, maybe 7, standing along the bridge at regular intervals, all on the wrong side of the railing, all in various states of decay and decomposition. A man in a business suit from the 1970s, his neck bent at an angle that would only be possible if it was broken. A teenage girl in modern clothes, but half her skull was caved in like she'd hit rocks on the way down. An elderly man whose entire body was bloated and discolored like he'd been in the water for weeks. And they were all turning to look at me now, all asking the same question in voices that sounded like they were drowning. "Did you come to jump too?" Then they all fell backward in perfect synchronization. 7 bodies arcing over the railing, plummeting toward the water, stopping mid-air, floating back up to repeat the loop. Over and over, a synchronized display of endless suicides playing out in front of me while the wind screamed and the fog pressed in from all sides. I ran, sprinted back to my truck, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. Started the engine, threw it in gear, didn't care about the delivery schedule or the company or anything except getting off that bridge. But when I looked in my side mirror as I accelerated away, I saw them all standing in a line across the road behind me. Not jumping anymore, just standing there in the middle of both lanes, watching me leave, their dead eyes tracking my truck as I drove. I called 911 from the first gas station I found, told them there were people on Deception Pass Bridge about to jump, multiple people in distress. The dispatcher said they'd send units to check, asked me to stay on the line, but I hung up. What was I supposed to tell them? That I'd seen dead people jumping and unjumping from the bridge, that they were caught in some kind of supernatural loop. They'd think I was drunk or high or insane. I never made that delivery. Called my dispatcher at 4:30 a.m., told him I was sick, needed to go home. He was pissed, cost the company money, cost me a bonus, but I didn't care. I drove straight home to my apartment in Everett, didn't stop, didn't sleep, just drove with all the lights on in the cab and the radio turned up loud so I wouldn't have to think about what I'd seen, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started researching Deception Pass, looking for any information about suicides there. Turns out it's one of the most popular suicide locations in Washington state. The bridge is 180 feet above water, with currents that run 8 to 9 miles per hour during tidal exchanges. If you jump and somehow survive the fall, the current pulls you under and drags you out to sea. Bodies are almost never recovered. Since the bridge opened in 1935, there have been over 60 confirmed suicides, and probably twice that many unconfirmed. I found news articles, obituaries, missing person reports. The woman I'd seen first, her name was Paloma Davidson, jumped July 15, 1994. Her body was never found. The man in the business suit was Harold Chen, jumped November 3, 1978, also never recovered. The teenage girl was Jaylene Marks, jumped January 12, 2001, just over a year before I saw her. None of their bodies were ever pulled from the water. They were all still there, still falling, still suspended in the worst moment of their lives, unable to complete the jump, unable to climb back to safety, just stuck in an eternal loop of suicide that never quite finishes. I tried going back once, 3 weeks later, middle of the day this time. Brought a friend with me, guy named Aspen, who worked security and didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural anything. Told him I needed moral support crossing a bridge because I'd had a panic attack there. We drove across at 2 p.m. on a sunny Saturday with plenty of traffic around us. Nothing happened. No figures on the railings, no dead people asking questions, nothing unusual at all. Just a normal bridge with tourists taking photos and families enjoying the view. Aspen looked at me like I was crazy when I kept scanning the railings, looking for any sign of what I'd seen. But at night, I won't cross it. Can't. I rerouted my entire delivery schedule to avoid Deception Pass after dark. Cost me hours of drive time, cost me money, Eventually cost me my job when I refused to take night routes through the area, and the company wouldn't accommodate me. My supervisor said I was being ridiculous, that bridges don't have ghosts, that I needed to see a therapist. Maybe I do need therapy. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do when you see things that can't be real, but I know what I saw. I know those people are still there, still jumping, still trapped in the moment between life and death. The bridge holds them somehow, won't let them finish dying, won't let them come back, just keeps them falling and rising, forever. I don't drive trucks anymore. Took a warehouse job, work days only, nothing that requires being out on the roads at night. My wife left me 6 months after that night because I couldn't explain why I'd become terrified of bridges, why I'd wake up screaming about people falling, why I refused to drive anywhere near Deception Pass even during daylight hours. She thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. But every time I see news about another suicide at Deception Pass, and there's been 3 more since 2002, I wonder if they made it all the way down, or if they're stuck in that horrible in-between, asking every driver who passes at 3 a.m. if they came to jump too. The currents under that bridge are some of the strongest in the region. Violent, unpredictable, deadly. The Salish people called the passage Kotsuck, which roughly translates to hard to get through. Sailors have feared it for centuries. But I don't think it's just the current that's dangerous. I think there's something about that specific place, that specific span of bridge over that specific channel of water, that doesn't let go of the dead, doesn't let them rest. Sometimes I dream about her. Paloma Davidson, the first one I saw. In the dreams, she's not falling anymore. She's standing on solid ground, soaking wet, water still pouring from her mouth, and she's reaching out to me. "You saw us," she says. "You're the only one who stopped, the only one who tried to help. Come back. Come back and help us finish." I wake up in a cold sweat every time, checking my hands to make sure they're not wet, checking my mouth to make sure I'm not drowning. Because part of me is terrified that one night I'll get in my car and drive to Deception Pass and park in the middle of the bridge and climb over that railing. Not because I want to die, but because something is calling me there. Something that wants to add me to its collection. The bridge is still there. Still carries thousands of cars every day. Still has that beautiful, dramatic arch against the sky. Still appears on postcards and tourist brochures. But if you ever have to cross it at night, especially in fog, especially around 3 a.m. when the tides are changing and the wind is strong and the visibility is shit, keep your eyes on the road. Don't look at the railings. Don't stop if you see someone standing on the wrong side. Because if you stop, if you try to help, they'll ask you that question. And once you hear it, once you know they're there, you become part of it somehow. Part of the bridge's collection. I heard it. I saw them. And now I can't unhear it. Can't unsee it. Can't escape the knowledge that there are places in this world where death doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Where people get stuck in moments of horror that repeat endlessly, and the only witnesses are the ones unlucky enough to be passing by at exactly the wrong time. Deception Pass. They named it that because the first European explorers thought it was a bay, not realizing until they sailed through that it was actually a narrow passage between 2 landmasses, a deception of geography. But I think the name fits for other reasons too. The bridge deceives you into thinking it's just steel and concrete, just architecture, just a way to get from one place to another. But it's more than that. It's a trap for the desperate, for the hopeless, for anyone who stands on that edge and makes the choice to let go. They let go, but they never land. They just keep falling forever, asking the same question to every person who stops. "Did you come to jump too?" I didn't jump, but sometimes I think part of me fell anyway. Play it back again. Wallace Chen handed me the digital recorder for the 3rd time, his face pale in the glow of our headlamps, and I pressed play, knowing I'd hear the same thing. 96 voices screaming in unison, calling my name, even though we were the only two people inside the abandoned Cascade Tunnel, and I hadn't said my name out loud once since we'd entered. I'm a railroad historian, 52 years old, spent the last 25 years documenting the history of railroad construction in the Pacific Northwest. Wallace was my research assistant, 28, fresh out of grad school with a master's in Pacific Northwest history and enough enthusiasm to make up for my cynicism. We'd been working together for 6 months, cataloging abandoned railway infrastructure, interviewing retired workers, building what we hoped would be the definitive historical archive of the region's railroad development. Professional work, academic work, nothing paranormal, nothing supernatural, just facts and photographs and oral histories. The old Cascade Tunnel near Stevens Pass was supposed to be a straightforward documentation project. The tunnel had been abandoned since 1929 when the longer, safer new tunnel opened. It was the site of the Wellington avalanche disaster of March 1st, 1910, the deadliest avalanche in United States history. 2 Great Northern Railway trains had been sitting at the Wellington depot during a blizzard when an avalanche swept them off the tracks and 300 feet down into the Ty River Valley. 96 people died, men, women, children, passengers, and crew, all killed in the middle of the night, buried under thousands of tons of snow and debris. The disaster had haunted the railroad company so badly they'd renamed the town from Wellington to Ty, like changing the name could erase the tragedy. They'd built the new tunnel to avoid the avalanche zone entirely. The old tunnel was sealed, forgotten, left to decay in the mountains. Until recently, when the Forest Service had unsealed a portion for structural assessment, and Wallace found mentions of it in some archived railway documents. "We have to document it," he'd said. "Primary source material from the actual tunnel where it happened. Think about the historical significance." I'd agreed because that's what historians do. We document. We preserve. We make sure disasters are remembered so they won't be repeated. So on October 23rd, 2016, we got the proper permits, filed our plans with the Forest Service, brought all the safety equipment we needed, and drove up to Stevens Pass to explore what remained of the Cascade Tunnel. The entrance was overgrown with brush and small trees. The old rails rusted into orange streaks, barely visible under decades of dirt and vegetation. The tunnel mouth yawned dark and cold, exhaling air that smelled of standing water and old coal smoke. Impossible, because no trains had run through here in 87 years. But that's what it smelled like. Coal, smoke, like a locomotive had passed through yesterday. We had headlamps, backup flashlights, a digital recorder for notes, Wallace's camera for photographs, respirators in case of bad air, and a gas detector to warn us about toxic buildups. Standard urban exploration equipment, all of it checked and double-checked. We weren't amateurs. We'd done this kind of work dozens of times in other tunnels, other abandoned sites. Recording started October 23rd, 2016, 2:47 p.m., I said into the recorder as we entered. Dr. Ephraim Morrison and research assistant Wallace Chen entering the old Cascade Tunnel at mile marker 0. Temperature is 41 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll document structural conditions and look for any remaining historical artifacts from the 1910 operations. The tunnel was in better shape than I'd expected. The walls were brick-lined, water-damaged but intact. The ceiling showed cracks but no major collapses. Rails were still visible under the muck, and every 100 yards or so we'd find remnants of the old electrical system, ceramic insulators, rusted wire, mounting brackets for lights that had been dark for nearly a century. We walked for maybe half a mile, Wallace photographing everything while I narrated observations into the recorder. Professional, methodical, exactly what we'd done in a dozen other tunnels. The air was cold but breathable, our gas detector silent. Everything was normal. That changed when we reached the halfway point, roughly where the tunnel would have passed directly under the Wellington Depot site, directly under where those 2 trains had been sitting when the avalanche hit. The temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly, like we'd walked through an invisible wall. My breath went from barely visible to thick clouds in the span of 2 steps. Wallace noticed it too, stopping mid-sentence in his photo documentation. Jesus, it just got freezing. You feel that? I checked my thermometer. 28 degrees. We'd dropped 13 degrees in less than 10 feet. That's not natural, not in a sealed tunnel with no air circulation. I made a note of it in the recorder, trying to keep my voice steady, scientific. Unexplained temperature drop at approximately tunnel midpoint. Possible airflow from collapse or side shaft. But there was no airflow. The air was completely still, no breeze, no draft. Just that sudden bone-deep cold and the smell of coal smoke getting stronger. And underneath it, another smell. Something organic, something rotting. Wallace was shining his light on the tunnel walls, and that's when we saw them. Scratches. Hundreds of scratches carved into the brick, concentrated in this section of the tunnel. Not random damage, deliberate marks made by fingernails or something similar. And words, scratched over and over, "Help us. Let us out. We're still here." Probably from the rescue workers, Wallace said, but his voice was uncertain. After the avalanche, maybe The avalanche happened. On the surface, I interrupted. At the depot, not in the tunnel. There'd be no reason for rescue workers to be scratching messages down here. I moved closer to examine the marks, and my headlamp beam caught something else. Handprints. Dozens of them, pressed into the brick in patterns that suggested people had been trying to push through solid wall. The prints were small and large, adult and child-sized, all concentrated in the same 50-foot section of tunnel. Wallace was taking photographs, the flash creating stark, unsettling shadows. This doesn't make sense. Why would there be evidence of people trying to get out from inside the tunnel when the disaster happened outside? I didn't have an answer. I was about to suggest we document this section thoroughly and then continue when we heard it. A sound from deeper in the tunnel. Not dripping water or settling rock, something rhythmic. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps coming toward us. We both froze, listening. The footsteps were clear now, echoing off the tunnel walls. Too many to count. Dozens of people walking, their feet dragging slightly, like they were struggling through deep snow or mud. "Hello?" Wallace called out. "Is someone there? This tunnel isn't safe for—" His voice died as the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Then, all at once, voices. Dozens of voices, overlapping, speaking in different languages and accents, all asking the same questions. Is it morning yet? When can we leave? Where are my children? Why won't the conductor let us off the train? The voices weren't coming from ahead of us. They were coming from the walls, from the brick itself, like the tunnel was speaking. Wallace grabbed my arm, his hand shaking. "We need to leave. Right now." I agreed. Whatever was happening here wasn't natural, wasn't something we could document or explain. We turned back toward the entrance, our headlamps cutting through the darkness, and started walking fast. Not running. The tunnel floor was too treacherous for that, but moving as quickly as we could while staying safe. The voices followed us. Not from behind, but from all around, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. Men and women and children, all talking at once, asking questions about the train, about the weather, about when they could continue their journey. They sounded confused, disoriented, like they didn't understand what had happened to them. Wallace had the recorder running, catching everything. I could see his hand shaking as he held it up. "This is impossible," he kept muttering. "This can't be real. This can't be—" The lights went out, both our headlamps simultaneously, despite having fresh batteries. Wallace's flashlight died too. Complete darkness, the kind of absolute black you only get deep underground where no light has ever reached. And in the darkness, the voices got louder. They were screaming now. 96 voices. I counted them later, when we listened to the recording. and there were exactly 96 distinct voices, all screaming in terror. Not words anymore, just raw, primal screams of people who knew they were about to die. Then I heard it. A sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A roar, deep and massive, like a mountain moving. The sound of an avalanche. Thousands of tons of snow and ice and rock thundering down, even though we were inside a sealed tunnel and the avalanche had happened 106 years ago. The roar got louder, closer, and I could feel vibration through my boots like something massive was approaching. "Run!" I screamed, and we ran. Blind in complete darkness, hands on the tunnel walls for guidance, stumbling over rails and debris. The roar was all around us now, deafening, and mixed with it were those screams, those 96 voices experiencing their deaths over and over. I don't know how we found the entrance. Maybe muscle memory, maybe luck, maybe something else guided us. But suddenly there was gray light ahead, daylight filtering through the tunnel mouth, and we burst out into the October afternoon, gasping and wild-eyed. Our lights came back on the instant we crossed the threshold, just clicked on like nothing had happened, like they'd never failed. Wallace collapsed against a tree, hyperventilating, while I bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to calm my heart rate. "The recorder," Wallace managed to say. "Tell me the recorder caught that." I checked. It had been running the entire time. I rewound to where the voices started and pressed play. What we heard made no scientific sense. The voices were clear, distinct, in multiple languages: English, Norwegian, Japanese, all the nationalities that had been on those trains in 1910. They asked their questions, they screamed, and underneath it all was that roar of the avalanche. And at one point, clear as day, multiple voices said, "Ephraim" and "Wallace." Our names, our actual names, even though we'd never introduced ourselves, never said them aloud in the tunnel. Wallace looked at me with wide eyes. How did they know our names? I had no answer. We packed our equipment in silence and drove back to Seattle without speaking. The next day, I sent an email to the Forest Service, requesting they reseal the tunnel permanently. I cited structural instability, which wasn't technically a lie. Something about that tunnel was fundamentally unstable, just not in a way structural engineers would understand. We spent 3 weeks analyzing the recording, brought in audio specialists, linguists, historians who specialized in the Wellington disaster. The recording was authentic. No signs of tampering or external noise. The voices were real. The languages were correct for the passenger manifests from those 2 trains. And the names, when we cross-referenced with the official casualty list from 1910, every single voice we could identify matched someone who had died in the avalanche. There was a woman asking about her children in a Dow, Norwegian, matched Sigrid Harstad, died in the avalanche with her 2 daughters. A man asking when they could continue to Spokane, matched James Morrison, traveling salesman, body never recovered. A child crying for her mother in Japanese, matched description of Yuki Takahashi, age 7, killed with her parents. They were all there, all 96 of them, still in that tunnel, still asking questions, still experiencing that moment of terror when the mountain came down on them while they slept. Trapped not just in the physical tunnel but in time itself, replaying their deaths endlessly. The recording became the central piece of my research, though I've never published it publicly. Too many questions I can't answer through historical methodology. How can voices from 1910 know our names? How can an avalanche that happened on the surface be heard inside a tunnel that was sealed afterward? How can the dead speak at all? I'm a historian. I deal in facts, in documents, in evidence that can be verified. But I stood in that tunnel and heard 96 people who died over a century ago call my name. I felt that avalanche roar through solid rock. I saw handprints on walls where no hands should have been. The old Cascade Tunnel was resealed in November 2016. Official reason: structural instability and public safety concerns. The Forest Service accepted my recommendation without question. Sometimes I wonder if they already knew, if other people had gone in over the years and heard the same things, made the same desperate escapes. Wallace quit working with me 3 months later. Couldn't handle it, he said. Couldn't reconcile what we'd experienced with everything he'd learned in graduate school about rational analysis and historical methodology. He switched fields entirely, works in corporate archives now, documents that are safely dead and silent. I'm still a railroad historian, still documenting, still preserving. But I've never entered another tunnel, can't bring myself to do it. Because I know now that some places don't just preserve history, they trap it. They hold on to moments of horror and replay them forever for anyone unlucky enough to be present. Sometimes, late at night, I play that recording. Listen to those voices asking their innocent questions. Is it morning yet? When can we leave? They don't know they're dead. Don't know they've been dead for 106 years. They're just passengers waiting for a train to take them onward, unaware that the journey ended the moment the mountain fell. There's a copy of the recording in a safety deposit box with instructions to donate it to the Washington State Historical Society after my death. Let some future historian decide what to do with evidence that 96 people are still screaming inside a sealed mountain tunnel, still dying in an avalanche that ended more than a century ago. The Cascade Tunnel disaster killed 96 people on March 1st, 1910, but I don't think they ever really died. I think they're still there, still waiting in the dark, still calling out to anyone who enters, still asking when morning will come. And the worst part? I have no answer for them, no way to help them, to free them, to let them know that morning came 106 years ago and left them behind. They're trapped in eternal midnight under the mountain, and they'll be there long after I'm gone, long after everyone who remembers the disaster is gone. Some history should be buried and forgotten, but the mountain won't let this one go. At 200 feet down, where Lake Crescent's glacial water turns from brilliant blue to absolute black, I found the car with its headlights still on. The woman inside was staring directly at me through the driver's side window, her eyes open, her hands still gripping the steering wheel, her body perfectly preserved by water so cold it prevents decomposition. And when I checked my dive computer, I realized I'd been at depth for 43 minutes on a tank that only holds 30 minutes of air. Reina Vasquez, 31 years old, PADI-certified dive instructor with over 2,000 log dives. I've explored shipwrecks in the Caribbean, cave systems in Mexico, oil rigs in the North Sea. I've seen things at depth that would make recreational divers quit the sport. Bodies mostly, but also aircraft wreckage, cars, evidence of crimes dumped in places people thought no one would ever look. The ocean keeps secrets. Lakes keep them too. But Lake Crescent in Olympic National Park is different. Lake Crescent doesn't just keep secrets, it preserves them. Perfectly. Forever. I was working a contract job in July 2015, documenting underwater conditions for the National Park Service. Lake Crescent is nearly 600 feet deep in places, one of the deepest lakes in Washington State, and the Park Service wanted baseline data on water quality, sediment, and structural integrity of the lake bed for their environmental monitoring programs. Routine work, scientific diving, nothing dangerous, nothing unusual. Just me, my equipment, and the clearest freshwater in the continental United States. The lake is famous for its clarity. The water is so pure, so lacking in nutrients that visibility can exceed 100 feet even at depth. It's like diving in air. You can see everything, the rocky bottom, the submerged trees, the way light filters down in these perfect shafts that look almost solid. It's beautiful, otherworldly. And on that July morning, with the surface conditions perfect and my equipment checked and double-checked, I was excited to push deeper than I had on previous dives, down to the 200-foot mark where the lake bottom drops off into what locals call the deep hole. I entered the water at 9:47 a.m. from the east shore near the Spruce Railroad Trail. My dive plan was simple. Descend along the slope to 200 feet, take measurements and photos, then ascend with proper decompression stops. Total bottom time at 200 feet would be about 8 minutes. That's all the time you get at that depth before nitrogen narcosis and decompression requirements become dangerous. My dive computer was set, my backup computer synced, my gas supply calculated down to the cubic foot. Professional dive planning. Everything by the book. The descent was perfect. I dropped down through layers of temperature, from the warm surface water through the thermocline into the deep cold where the temperature hovers just above freezing year-round. At 100 feet, I stopped to equalize and check my gear. Everything. Normal. At 150 feet, I turned on my high-intensity dive light because the ambient light was fading fast. At 180 feet, I reached the edge of the drop-off and looked down into darkness that seemed to have no bottom. My light beam cut through the water, and that's when I saw it. A reflection. Metal, catching my light, maybe 30 feet deeper. I checked my depth gauge, 183 feet, and made the decision to go deeper. Whatever was down there wasn't supposed to be there. No boats had been reported missing on Lake Crescent. No vehicles. But someone needed to know what was sitting at the bottom of this lake. I descended slowly, watching my depth gauge, feeling the narcosis starting to creep in at the edges of my awareness. At 200 feet, things start feeling strange. Colors disappear. Your thinking slows down. You feel drunk, euphoric, like everything's fine even when it's not. I was trained for it, knew how to recognize and manage it. But as I got closer to that metal reflection, I started to realize that what I was seeing didn't make sense. It was a car. A Honda Civic, light blue, sitting upright on the lake bottom, like someone had just parked it there. The windows were intact, the doors were closed, and the headlights were on. 2 perfect beams of yellow light cutting through the blue darkness, still bright, still burning, even though no car battery could last more than a few hours underwater. I approached the driver's side, my light playing over the vehicle. No visible damage, no broken windows. It looked like it had been driven down here yesterday, not sunk in some accident. I moved closer to the window and looked inside. That's when I saw her. A woman, maybe 30 years old, sitting in the driver's seat with her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She was wearing a yellow sundress. Her hair floated around her head in the current like seaweed. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead through the windshield at nothing. And her skin looked perfect. Not bloated or discolored or damaged the way drowning victims look. Just pale, like she was sleeping, like she'd close her eyes and wake up any second. Lake Crescent does this. The water is so cold and so pure that bodies don't decompose normally. They're preserved, sometimes for decades, in a state that looks almost alive. The most famous case was Hallie Latham Illingworth, murdered by her husband in 1937, dumped in the lake, and not found until 1940. Her body so well preserved that investigators could identify her immediately and determine cause of death. The lake had kept her like she was in a freezer. This woman had been down here for a while. Had to have been. But she looked like she'd been here for maybe a week at most. I checked the license plate, memorizing the numbers so I could report it. Washington state plate, recent registration sticker. I took photos with my underwater camera, documenting the scene the way I'd been trained. That's when she moved. Just slightly. Her head turned, maybe an inch, and her eyes shifted. They focused on me. Through the window, through the water, through the impossibility of what I was seeing, she looked directly at me. And her mouth moved. I couldn't hear anything through the glass and the water, but I could read her lips. Help me. I jerked backward, almost dropping my camera. That's not possible. People don't survive at 200 feet underwater in sealed cars. The pressure alone would, but I was seeing it. She was moving, looking at me, asking for help. I checked my dive computer. I'd been at depth for 12 minutes. That was already too long. I needed to start my ascent or risk serious decompression sickness. But there was someone alive in that car, someone who needed help. I moved back to the window, trying to see how to get her out, looking for a way to open the door. Her hand came off the steering wheel and pressed against the glass. Palm flat, fingers spread. Her lips moved again. "Help me. Please help me. I've been here so long." I grabbed the door handle and pulled. Locked. Of course it was locked. I tried to signal to her to unlock it, but she just kept staring at me with those perfectly preserved eyes, her hand against the glass, her mouth forming the same words over and over. "Help me. Help me. Help me." My computer started beeping. 15 minutes at depth. I was going into mandatory decompression territory. I had to leave. Had to surface. But I couldn't leave her. I pulled a dive knife from my belt and tried to break the window. The blade bounced off, safety glass, designed not to shatter. I tried again, harder, and the knife slipped from my hand, tumbling away into the darkness below. The woman's expression changed, not panicked, sad, deeply, impossibly sad. She shook her head slowly and mouthed new words. "You can't help me. No one can help me. I've been here since 1952. That was 63 years ago. 63 years sitting in a car at the bottom of Lake Crescent, perfectly preserved, perfectly aware, perfectly trapped. I stared at her, and she stared back, and I realized that her hand against the glass wasn't pressing outward. It was positioned wrong for that. She was pressing inward, keeping something out, or keeping herself in. My computer was screaming at me now, 20 minutes at depth. I looked at my tank pressure gauge. It should have been showing maybe 800 psi left. It showed 2,400, more than I'd started with. That's impossible. Gauges don't go up. Tanks don't refill themselves underwater. I looked back at the woman in the car. She was smiling now. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. Like she understood something I didn't. Her lips moved again. "You're one of us now." That's when I noticed my watch. The dive watch on my wrist that had been synchronized with my computer before I entered the water. It showed 10:30 a.m. I'd entered the water at 9:47. That was 43 minutes ago. 43 minutes at 200 feet depth. No one survives that. The nitrogen, loading alone would be... I looked at my backup dive computer. It showed the same thing, 43 minutes at depth, but I only had a 30-minute tank. I should have been breathing emergency gas 20 minutes ago. I should have been dead 15 minutes ago. The water around me started to feel different, thicker, like it was pressing in from all sides, holding me, the way it held the woman in the car. I looked down at my hands and saw they looked paler than they should. I touched my face, and my glove came away with something on it. Not blood, not decay, but something in between. The lake was starting to preserve me too. I kicked for the surface. Didn't care about decompression stops, didn't care about protocol. Just kicked and watched my depth gauge slowly, impossibly slowly, count downward. 190 feet. 180 feet. The ascent was taking forever. Too long. Way too long. I should have been at 100 feet by now. At 150 feet, I saw another car. Different model. Older. From the 1960s, maybe. Someone inside, perfectly preserved, watching me pass. Their hand came up in a wave. A slow, sad wave. At 120 feet, I saw 3 more. All with people inside. All perfectly preserved. All watching me with those hollow, knowing eyes. At 100 feet, I lost count. There were dozens of them. Cars scattered across the slope like a parking lot. All with drivers still inside. All trapped in the moment of their deaths, perfectly preserved, perfectly aware. How many people had died in Lake Crescent over the decades? How many accidents? How many suicides? How many murders? The lake kept them all. I broke the surface at 11:02 a.m. gasping, ripping my regulator out of my mouth, swimming frantically for shore. I crawled onto the rocks of the beach, shaking, hyperventilating, pulling my gear off with shaking hands. My dive computer was still beeping its alarm. Missed decompression stops, nitrogen loading critical, Seek immediate medical attention. I called 911, told them about the car, about the woman, about the license plate number I'd memorized. They transferred me to the sheriff's department. I gave them everything: the location, the depth, the description. They said they'd send a recovery team. 3 days later, they called me back. They'd sent divers down, professional recovery divers, with equipment far better than mine. They'd found the spot I'd marked on the map. They'd gone to 200 feet. No car, no body. Nothing but empty lake bottom and scattered rocks. "Are you sure about the location?" the detective asked. "Because our divers did a grid search of the entire area. There's nothing down there." But I had photos. I pulled up my dive camera and went through the images. The car, the woman, the license plate. All of it should have been there. Instead, every photo from below 150 feet showed nothing but blue water and rocks. No cars, no bodies, just empty lake. I checked the license plate number with the DMV anyway. It came back to a 1947 Chevrolet registered to Mariella Foster, reported missing along with its driver on September 12, 1952. Mariella Foster, age 28, drove off the road somewhere near Lake Crescent and was never seen again. Her car was never recovered. Her body was never found. I haven't been in the water since. Sold all my dive equipment, canceled my certifications, took a job teaching marine biology at a community college where I never have to get wet. People ask why I quit diving. I tell them I had an equipment malfunction, had a scare, decided it wasn't worth the risk anymore, but that's not why. I quit because I know what's down there now. I know that Lake Crescent doesn't just preserve bodies. It preserves consciousness. It keeps people aware, trapped, perfectly preserved in the moment of their deaths, sitting in their cars, or floating in the water, or lying on the bottom, unable to die, unable to leave, unable to do anything but wait for the next diver to come down and see them and realize too late that the lake has claimed them too. My dive computer still shows 43 minutes at depth. The nitrogen loading should have killed me or at least given me severe decompression sickness. But I'm fine, physically fine. Except sometimes I wake up at night and I'm not breathing. Just lying there, perfectly still, perfectly preserved, staring at the ceiling like the woman in the car stared through her windshield. And sometimes, when I'm in the shower or washing my face, the water on my skin feels too cold. Feels like lake water. Like it's trying to preserve me, trying to finish what it started at 200 feet down. I'm terrified that one day I'll wake up and realize I never made it to the surface, that I'm still down there at 200 feet, perfectly preserved in glacial water, watching divers pass by and trying to ask them for help, not understanding that I've been dead for years, and the lake just won't let me realize it. Lake Crescent is beautiful, the clearest water in Washington, perfect visibility, perfect preservation. And somewhere at the bottom, in the deep hole where light doesn't reach, Mariella Foster is still sitting in her car with her hands on the steering wheel, waiting for someone to help her, waiting for the next diver to come down and join the collection. I saw her. I looked into her eyes. And now I'm terrified that she's still looking back. The wheat was on fire, but it wasn't burning. The flames were moving through the stalks like living things, blue-white and cold. And when they touched my skin, I felt nothing but a bone-deep chill that made my teeth chatter. Aiden Torres stepped back from his combine, wrench still in his hand, watching the fire that wasn't fire spread across 40 acres in seconds. And in the flames, he could see faces forming, dissolving, reforming. Dozens of faces, all screaming silently. I'm 45 years old, been a combine operator in eastern Washington for 23 years. I work for Miller Agricultural Services, running equipment for farmers who don't own their own machines. It's good money, steady work, and I know these fields like I know my own hands. The Walla Walla Valley grows some of the finest wheat in the country, and I've harvested most of it at one time or another. September 21st, 2018, I was working the Patterson Farm, a 600-acre operation about 8 miles outside Walla Walla proper. Beautiful night for harvesting, Clear skies, mild temperature, no wind. The kind of night where you can run all night without issues. I'd started at sundown, around 7 p.m., planning to work until 3 or 4 a.m. The wheat was perfect, dry, ready, yielding heavy. Around 10:30 p.m., the combine started making a weird noise. Not the usual mechanical sounds, this was different, almost organic, like something breathing inside the machinery. I shut it down immediately, climbed out to take a look. Farm equipment is expensive, and you don't ignore strange noises. That's when I saw them. Figures standing in the wheat about 50 yards out. 4 of them, maybe 5, just standing there perfectly still. I called out, "Hey, this is private property." No response. They didn't move, didn't react, just stood there. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward them, annoyed. Probably kids from town, trespassing, thinking it's funny to mess with the night harvest. But as I got closer, something was wrong with the way they were standing. Too still, too rigid, like mannequins posed in the field. 20 yards out, I stopped. These weren't kids. These weren't people. The figures were made of wheat, stalks twisted and woven together into human shapes, arms and legs and torsos and heads, all connected to the ground like they'd grown there. And they were moving now, slowly, turning their wheat stalk heads toward me. I backed up fast, my heart hammering. The figures started walking, not on legs, but flowing, stalks extending and contracting, pulling themselves forward through the field. And behind them, more were rising. 10, 20, dozens of wheat people forming out of the crop itself, all moving toward me. I ran back to the combine, jumped in the cab, tried to start it. The engine turned over, but wouldn't catch. I tried again, while those things got closer. Through the cab windows, I could see them surrounding the machine. Wheat stalk hands reaching up, touching the metal, and where they touched, wheat started growing, sprouting from the combine itself, stalks pushing through steel like it was soil. The radio crackled to life even though I hadn't turned it on. A voice came through, distorted, multiple voices speaking at once. "The harvest demands, the harvest demands, the harvest demands." The wheat figures were climbing the combine now. I could see their faces. Horrible approximations of human features made from twisted grain, eyeless, mouthless, but somehow looking directly at me. I kicked the door open, knocking one of them back, and jumped out the opposite side. I ran into the wheat, no plan, just pure panic. Behind me, I could hear them following, the whisper rustle of stalks moving, in ways stalks shouldn't move. I ran for what felt like forever, my lungs burning, my legs cramping, expecting any second to feel those wheat stalk hands grabbing me. I broke through onto the access road at the edge of the Patterson property, gasping, and ran straight into Jake Patterson's truck. He was coming to check on my progress. "Aiden, what the hell? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The field," I managed to say. "There's something in the field. Things made of wheat. They were..." "Slow down, man. You having a heart attack or something?" He grabbed my shoulder. "Come on, let's get you some water." We drove back toward where I'd left the combine. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but it sounded insane even to me. Wheat people, figures made of crops, the harvest demands. Jake listened with that expression people get when they think you're losing your mind. When we got to the combine, it was fine. Running normally, no wheat growing from it, no damage. The field around it looked completely normal. Just regular wheat, gently swaying in the breeze that had picked up. No figures, no wheat stalks shaped like people. Nothing. "You feeling okay?" Jake asked. "Maybe you need to call it a night. Exhaustion can make you see things." I climbed into the combine, checked everything. All normal, all working, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what had chased me. I refused to finish the job, told Jake I wasn't feeling well, needed to go home. He wasn't happy. We had a contract, a deadline, but he could see I was shaken. He paid me for the hours I'd worked and got someone else to finish the harvest. 3 days later, that someone else was found dead in the Patterson field. Combine was running, going in circles, and the operator was slumped over the controls. Heart attack, the coroner said. But when they pulled the body out, there was wheat in his lungs, not kernels he'd inhaled, full stalks with roots growing from the inside out. I went to Jake's funeral 2 weeks after that. He died in his sleep. Natural causes, they said. But his wife mentioned something odd. There'd been wheat growing in their bedroom, just a few stalks, coming up through the floorboards, even though they lived on a concrete foundation. She'd pulled them up the day before Jake died. I don't work harvest anymore. Took a job at a grain elevator, daytime hours only, never touching the living crop. The money's worse, the work's harder. But I'm not in the fields. Not at night. Not when the wheat can move. Last week, I drove past the Patterson farm. It's abandoned now. No one will work it. The wheat grew wild this year, unharvested, and standing in the middle of it are shapes, dozens of them, tall, human-sized, made of wheat, waiting for the next person stupid enough to try to harvest them. The harvest demands. I heard it that night, and now I understand what it means. The wheat doesn't just grow, it takes. And in Walla Walla, in the fields where generations have planted and reaped, something has been growing alongside the crop, something that looks like wheat but isn't, something that's been waiting, patient, for the right time to show what harvest really means. I'm alive because I ran. The others, the operator, Jake Patterson, and 3 more farmhands who've died this season in mysterious accidents, they didn't run. They stayed. They became part of the harvest. The wheat is still there, still growing, still waiting, and every night more figures rise from the fields. The harvest demands, and eventually, it takes what it's owed. Contact lost with lighthouse personnel 72 hours ago, my supervisor said over the radio, his voice crackling with static. You're going in alone to find out why Keeper Morrison stopped responding. And Lavender, if you find something you can't handle, you get back to that boat immediately. I'm Coast Guard Technician Lavender Chen, 28 years old, stationed at Astoria since 2001. And in my 7 years of service, I'd done dozens of lighthouse maintenance calls. Cape Disappointment. Lighthouse sits on the Washington coast at the mouth of the Columbia River, one of the most dangerous bar crossings in the world. Ships wreck there constantly. Over 2,000 vessels lost since they started keeping records. The locals call it the graveyard of the Pacific. The lighthouse has kept watch over those waters since 1856, warning ships away from the rocks, and in all that time, every keeper who served there has reported the same thing. They see ships that aren't there, phantom vessels, ghost ships, wrecks replaying their final moments. Most keepers ignore it, write it off as stress, isolation, the psychological toll of watching the ocean day after day. But Harold Morrison, the current keeper, had called it in 3 weeks ago, said the phantom ship was getting closer, said he was seeing survivors in the water, people drowning and calling for help. But every time he called for rescue, there was nothing there. Command told him to take a few days' leave, get checked by medical. He refused. Said someone had to keep the light running. Said if he left, they'd all drown. Then, 3 days ago, his radio calls stopped. His scheduled weather reports, nothing. His daily check-ins, silence. We tried reaching him by radio, phone, even sent a helicopter to do a flyover. The lighthouse looked normal. Light was operational. But Morrison wasn't responding, so they sent me. October 14th, 2002, I took the Coast Guard cutter across the Columbia Bar in moderate seas, transferred to a rigid inflatable for the final approach to the lighthouse. The structure sits on a rocky point, waves crashing against the base, accessible only by boat when the tide's right. I had a 2-hour window to get in, find Morrison, and get out before the tide made landing impossible. I climbed the ladder up to the access door, my gear bag heavy on my back. The door was unlocked. First red flag. Lighthouse keepers always lock the door when they're inside. I called out as I entered. Morrison, Coast Guard maintenance check. My voice echoed up the spiral staircase that wound through the tower's center. No response. The keeper's quarters were on the first level. I checked them first. Bed made, dishes washed, everything neat and organized. Morrison's logbook was on the desk, open to his last entry. I read it, my skin going cold. October 11th, 2002, day 847 of posting. The ship appeared again at 300 hours during storm. Cargo vessel, late 19th century design, on collision course with rocks. Counted. 23 souls on deck. They were screaming for help. I called Coast Guard. They found nothing on radar. Ship vanished at 03:18 hours as it struck rocks. But I heard them drowning. Every single one. October 12th, 2002, day 848. Ship returned at 300 hours. Same ship. Same 23 souls. Same crash. Same screaming. How many times have they died? How many nights have I watched them drown? October 13th, 2002, day 849. Ship appeared at 300. This time I went outside. I had to try to help. They were in the water below the lighthouse. I could see their faces. A woman was reaching up toward me. A child was calling for his mother. I threw down life rings, ropes, anything. The woman grabbed a rope. I felt the weight of her. I started pulling. But when I got the rope back up, there was nothing on it. No one in the water. Ship gone. Yet I had felt her weight. I had felt her drowning. October 14th, 0200 hours. I understand now. They're not ghosts. They're trapped, replaying their deaths every night. But tonight something changed. The ship appeared at midnight, 3 hours early. And there are more of them now. Not 23 souls. Dozens. Hundreds. Every ship that ever wrecked here. They're all coming back, all at once. I can see them from the gallery. The water is full of drowning people. They're climbing onto the rocks. They're climbing toward the lighthouse. They're coming for me because I'm the only one who can see them. The only one who tried to help. Final entry, they're at the door. The log ended there. I stood in the quiet keeper's quarters, the only sound the distant crash of waves, and felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in clouds. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Chen. Morrison's not here. His log indicates he experienced psychological distress related to phantom ship sightings. Requesting. A sound from above. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, climbing the spiral staircase toward the light room at the top. Heavy footsteps. Wet footsteps. I could hear water dripping. Morrison, I called up the stairs. Is that you? The footsteps stopped. Then, from above, a voice. But not Morrison's voice. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in unison. Why didn't you save us? I pulled my flashlight and started up the stairs, protocol overriding fear. If Morrison was up there, if he needed help, I had to reach him. I climbed past the second level, storage and equipment, and continued up toward the light room. The temperature got colder with each step, and the walls were wet. Not damp, soaking wet. Water running down the brick interior like the lighthouse was underwater. I reached the light room. The massive Fresnel lens rotated slowly on its mercury float, bearing, sending the beam out across the dark ocean. And standing at the gallery door, looking out over the water, was Harold Morrison. His back was to me. His clothes were soaking wet. Water pooled around his feet. Morrison, I approached, slowly. I'm Coast Guard. We're here to help you. He didn't turn around, just kept staring out at the ocean. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, distant. Do you see them? I looked out through the glass. The ocean was rough, whitecaps visible in the lighthouse beam. Nothing unusual. See what? The ships. All of them. Every vessel that ever wrecked on this bar. They're all out there right now, hitting the rocks, breaking apart, drowning their crews, over and over, for eternity. Morrison, there's nothing out there. We need to get you off this light. You need medical attention. He finally turned to look at me, and I stepped back involuntarily. His eyes were wrong, clouded, milky like a drowned corpse, and his skin had that bloated, waterlogged look I'd seen on bodies pulled from the ocean after days in the water. I tried to save them, he said. The woman with the rope. She pulled me in, pulled me down. I drowned with them. I've been drowning for 3 days now, over and over. Every time the ships wreck, I drown with them. That's not possible. You're standing right here. He smiled and water poured from his mouth. Am I? Are you sure? The gallery door slammed open, and the storm that had been threatening all day hit with full force. Rain and wind and spray flooded the light room. I grabbed the railing as the lighthouse shook, and in the beam of the rotating light I saw them. Ships, dozens of ships, sailing vessels, steamers, fishing boats, cargo ships, all of them converging on the rocks below the lighthouse, all of them hitting at the same moment, all of them breaking apart, and in the water, hundreds of people, drowning, screaming, reaching up toward the light. Morrison walked out onto the gallery, into the storm. They want the light, he said. They think if they reach the light, they can stop drowning. But the light just keeps showing them how to die again. I ran after him. Get back inside. You'll be swept off. But he was already climbing over the gallery railing. I lunged for him, caught his arm, and the moment I touched him, I felt it. Water. Ice-cold ocean water filling my lungs, pulling me down, crushing pressure, complete darkness, the horror of drowning while your mind screams for air that will never come. I let go and fell back into the light room, gasping, choking on air that tasted like salt water. Morrison dropped into the darkness below. I heard no splash, just the sound of the storm and the distant screams of drowning people that shouldn't exist. I got back to the boat somehow. Don't remember climbing down. Don't remember the ladder or the transfer or the ride back across the bar. I remember sitting in the cutter's cabin, wrapped in blankets, shaking, while my crew asked questions I couldn't answer. They found Morrison's body 2 days later, washed up on a beach 15 miles north. Medical examiner said he'd been dead for approximately 3 days. Drowned. They found water in his lungs, seawater, but he'd been inside the lighthouse the whole time. No access to the ocean, no way to drown. I wrote my report. Kept it factual, clinical. Stated that Keeper Morrison had succumbed to psychological distress and died by drowning under circumstances that remained under investigation. Didn't mention the ships. Didn't mention the voices. Didn't mention feeling drowning while standing on dry land. They reassigned me to shore duty after that. Said I needed a break from sea postings. I didn't argue. I couldn't go back to that lighthouse. Couldn't go back to any lighthouse. 'Cause now I see them too. Not as clearly as Morrison did, but on foggy nights, when I'm near the coast, I see the ships. Phantom vessels hitting rocks that aren't there. And I hear the drowning. Hundreds of voices calling for help that will never come. Cape Disappointment lighthouse still operates. Automated now, no keeper required. The light turns every night, warning ships away from the rocks. But I wonder if the warning works both ways. If the light isn't just for the living. If maybe it's also marking the spot where the dead are trapped, drowning forever, reaching for a salvation that the light promises but never delivers. Morrison understood that in the end. That's why he went over the railing. Not to die, he was already dead. Had been since the woman on the rope pulled him down. He went over because that's what you do when you're drowning and you see the light. You swim toward it, even though it's not rescue, even though it's just showing you the way to drown again. I think about him every night. About those 3 days he spent drowning in the lighthouse before anyone realized he was gone. About how many times he died in those 72 hours. About whether he's still there, still climbing that spiral staircase, still staring out at ships that are always sinking, always killing their crews, always replaying the worst moments recorded in the graveyard of the Pacific. The lighthouse keeps turning. The light keeps shining. And somewhere under those waters, in depths that maps don't show, the wrecked ships sail on, their crews drowning in perpetual loops that started decades or centuries ago and will never end. I don't go near Cape Disappointment anymore. Don't go near any lighthouse on stormy nights, because I know what I'll see if I look. The ships, the drowning, the desperate futile reaching toward a light that promises rescue but delivers only the endless repetition of death. Morrison saw them. Morrison tried to help them, and Morrison joined them. Somewhere between the lighthouse and the water, between the living world and whatever hell those wrecked sailors inhabit, Harold Morrison is still drowning, still reaching for a rescue that will never come. The ocean doesn't give up its dead. The lighthouse can't save them. And anyone who tries to help just becomes another soul trapped in the drowning, another voice screaming into the storm, another person learning too late that some lights don't guide you home. They just mark the place where you'll die forever. I should have noticed the mine entrance wasn't on any of my maps. Standing there in late October snow with my camera bag slung over my shoulder, watching the first real storm of winter roll into the Cascade Mountains. I was so focused on getting the perfect shot of Monte Cristo ghost town before the roads became impassable that I didn't register the obvious warning. The wooden support beams looked new. The shaft entrance was clear of debris, and there were fresh boot prints in the mud leading inside. My name is Harmony Blake. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years photographing abandoned places across the Pacific Northwest. I've built a decent following online, about 40,000 people who appreciate the beauty in decay, the haunting quality of places left behind, old hotels, defunct sawmills, forgotten towns. I specialize in locations that capture that specific moment when nature starts reclaiming what humans built. It's art, it's documentation, it's preservation of a kind. Monte Cristo is perfect for that. The town boomed in the 1890s as a silver mining camp, peaked at around 2,000 residents, then collapsed when the mines failed and floods destroyed the rail line. By 1907, it was essentially abandoned. Now, it's a collection of deteriorating buildings deep in the mountains, accessible only by a rough hiking trail. The Forest Service maintains minimal facilities, but the original structures, what's left of them, are slowly being swallowed by avalanches, floods, and the relentless growth of the rainforest. I'd been planning this trip for months. Late October is risky. Early snow can trap you, but the autumn colors mixed with the first snow create stunning contrasts. I hiked in on October 28, 2016 with my full camera kit, camping gear, and supplies for 3 days. The weather forecast called for clear conditions, but mountain weather changes fast. I reached Monte Cristo around 3 p.m. and spent the remaining daylight photographing the collapsed hotel, the old assay office, the cluster of miners' cabins that had been partially crushed by an avalanche years ago. The light was perfect. Golden afternoon sun cutting through the snow-laden clouds, creating dramatic shadows. I was in my element, moving from building to building, setting up shots, adjusting exposures. Around 5 p.m., with maybe 30 minutes of usable light left, I found the mine. It was set back from the main town site, up a slope of talus and scrub pine. The entrance was a horizontal shaft maybe 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, disappearing into darkness. And it looked maintained. That should have stopped me immediately, but the composition was too good. The dark entrance, framed by new fallen snow, the weathered timbers, the way the shadows fell across the opening. I had to get the shot. I set up my tripod about 20 feet from the entrance and composed the frame. Through my viewfinder, I could see details I'd missed with the naked eye. There was a lantern just inside the entrance, hanging from a spike driven into a support beam. It looked antique, brass and glass, the kind miners used in the 1890s. Odd, but not impossible. Maybe the Forest Service used it for historical displays. I took several shots, bracketing exposures, then moved closer for a tighter composition. That's when I noticed the boot prints more clearly. They led into the mine. Just one set, going in. None coming out. fresh enough that the edges of the prints were still sharp despite the light snow that had started falling. Someone was in that mine, I called out. Hello? Is someone in there? My voice echoed slightly, then died in the snow-dampened air. No response. I should have left it alone. Should have hiked back to my camp and reported it to the Forest Service in the morning. But I'm a photographer. I document things. I investigate. I'm curious by nature. And there was a story here. Someone in an old mine in a ghost town in late October with a storm coming. That's not normal. That's not safe. I pulled out my flashlight and approached the entrance. The lantern was definitely antique, and it was lit. I could see a faint glow from the wick, smell the kerosene. Who lights a kerosene lantern in an abandoned mine? Hello? I called again, standing at the threshold. I'm a photographer. Are you okay in there? There's a storm coming. From deep in the shaft, a voice. Male, rough, echoing strangely. You shouldn't be here. This mine's claimed. I'm not here to claim anything. I'm just taking photos. Are you okay? Do you need help? A long pause. Then, been here since '97. Don't need help. Need you to leave. That was 19 years ago. No one lives in abandoned mines for 19 years. Sir, I think you might be confused. It's 2016, October. There's a storm coming and I know what year it is. His voice was closer now. I could hear footsteps, boots on rock. Been here since 1897. This is my mine, my claim. Get out. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October cold. I stepped back from the entrance, raising my flashlight. The beam caught him as he emerged from the shaft. He was wearing miner's clothes, canvas pants, suspenders, a wool shirt, heavy boots. All of it looked period appropriate, well worn, covered in rock dust. But his face was wrong, too pale, too drawn. And his eyes had that hollow, sunken look of old photographs, of people who'd been dead for more than a century. This is my claim, he repeated, and I could see his lips moving, but the words seemed to come from elsewhere, like they were being carried on an echo. Registered August 14th, 1897, under the name of Stefan Kovich. I got papers. I got rights. I backed away slowly, my flashlight beam shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass. I'll leave. He didn't follow me out of the mine entrance, just stood there in the opening, the kerosene lantern light flickering behind him, his form solid but somehow not quite right. Like a photograph overlaid on reality. They all leave, he said. They all come taking pictures, poking around, and then they leave. But I can't leave. This mine is all I got. This claim is all I am. I was maybe 20 feet away now, still backing up, not willing to turn my back on him. What happened to you? Why are you here? Collapse, February 3rd, 1898. Tunnel came down on me while I was working alone. Broke both legs, crushed my chest. Took 3 days to die in the dark. They never found my body. Never recovered it. So I'm still here. Still working my claim. Still waiting for someone to find me. My foot hit something. My tripod. I stumbled, caught myself. When I looked back at the mine entrance, he was gone. Just the empty shaft and the lantern still burning inside. I grabbed my gear and ran. Didn't bother packing it properly, just scooped everything up and sprinted back down the slope toward the main town site. The snow was falling harder now, visibility dropping, but I didn't care. I had to get away from that mine, away from Stefan Kovich, who'd been dead for 118 years, but was still claiming his worthless silver deposit. I made it to my camp, threw everything in my pack, and started hiking out. It was nearly full dark, the trail barely visible, but I had a headlamp, and I knew the way. 8 miles to my truck. I could do it. I had to do it. 3 miles in, I checked my camera. I'd been shooting digital all day, hundreds of shots stored on the memory card. I scrolled through them, looking for the mine entrance shots. They were there, all of them. But in every single photo, standing just inside the entrance beside the lantern was Stefan Kovich. In the distant shots, he was barely visible, just a dark figure. In the closer shots, I could see his face clearly, hollow-eyed, pale, staring directly at the camera, staring at me. And in the last photo, the closest one I'd taken before he'd spoken to me, there was something else. Behind Stefan, deeper in the mine, other figures. Dozens of them. Other miners, other prospectors, all dressed in period clothing, all with that same hollow-eyed look, all trapped in a collapsed mine that had claimed their lives more than a century ago. I deleted the photos. Every single one. Didn't even think about it, just deleted them all. The mine shots and everything else from that day. I didn't want any record of what I'd seen. Didn't want any connection to that place. I made it to my truck at 11 p.m., exhausted, hypothermic, terrified. Drove straight through to Seattle without stopping. When I got home, I uploaded all my camera backups to check if the photos had synced to my cloud storage before I'd deleted them. They had. The cloud backup showed all the mine shots, all with Stefan Kovic visible in the entrance. And there was one more photo I didn't remember taking. Timestamp showed 5:47 p.m., after I'd run away, after I'd packed my gear, after I'd started hiking out. The photo showed me, walking away from the mine, my pack, on my back, taken from inside the mine entrance, looking out. Stefan Kovic had used my camera after I'd dropped it, and in the bottom corner of the frame, barely visible, was his hand holding the camera, translucent, skeletal, bones visible through semi-solid flesh. I quit Urbex photography after that, deleted my website, my social media, everything. Some of my followers were confused, some were angry, but I didn't care. I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't photograph abandoned places knowing that some of them weren't really abandoned, that some of them still had residents who couldn't leave, who were trapped in the moment of their deaths, still trying to work claims that would never pay out, still waiting to be found by rescuers who would never come. The Monte Cristo mine is still there. I checked the historical records. Stefan Kovic was a real person. Registered a claim in August 1897. Reported missing in February 1898. His body was never recovered. The mine entrance collapsed and was never reopened. But according to my photographs, someone reopened it. Or something did. And Stefan is still there, still working, still claiming his rights to a worthless hole in the ground. The Forest Service doesn't maintain that mine. I called them anonymously and asked. They said all the old Monte Cristo mines were sealed decades ago for safety reasons. No entrances are accessible. No structures are maintained. But I saw it. I photographed it. I spoke to the man who died there 118 years ago. Sometimes I still hear him. Late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear his voice. This is my claim. I got papers. I got rights. And I wonder if I brought something back with me from Monte Cristo. If by photographing him, by documenting his existence, I created some kind of connection. If he's following me now, the way he followed his claim into death. I moved to Portland 6 months later. Couldn't stay in Seattle. Couldn't be that close to the Cascades, to Monte Cristo, to that mine entrance that shouldn't exist but does. I work in a photo lab now, processing other people's pictures. I never pick up a camera myself, never photograph anything, because I learned that some images capture more than light and shadow. Some images capture what's trapped between life and death. And once you've documented it, once you've acknowledged it exists, it knows you're there. Stefan Kovic is still in that mine, still working his claim, still waiting to be found. And every late October, when the first snow falls in the Cascades, I wonder if another photographer will hike into Monte Cristo looking for the perfect shot. I wonder if they'll find the mine entrance that shouldn't be there. I wonder if they'll photograph the man standing in the darkness with his kerosene lantern, or if they'll be smart enough to walk away. I photographed him. I have proof he exists, even though I deleted it from everywhere I could find. But the cloud never really forgets, and neither do I. Stefan Kovic died in February 1898, and he's been dying there ever since, trapped in a mine that holds him tighter than any cave-in ever could. Monte Cristo's last resident isn't leaving, and now he knows what a camera is. He knows how to use one, and I think somehow he knows how to follow the connection back to the person who took his picture. Some places are abandoned for good reason. Some ghosts should stay in their graves, and some photographs should never be taken, because the moment you frame that shot and press the shutter, you're acknowledging that what you're seeing is real, and once it knows you can see it, it can see you too. I saw Stefan Kovic, and now he sees me, forever. My radiation detector screamed to life at 2:47 a.m., registering levels that should have been impossible 50 yards outside the official contamination zone. And through my night vision goggles, I watched a man in a 1960s-era hazmat suit walk through the wall of a building that had been demolished in 1995. Shmuel Reyes, 38 years old, former military security contractor now working private security at restricted sites. And in my 15 years doing this job, I'd never seen my Geiger counter spike to 847 millisieverts per hour in a zone that was supposed to be clean. The Hanford site in eastern Washington is one of America's most contaminated places. During World War II and the Cold War, it produced plutonium for nuclear weapons, 9 nuclear reactors, 5 plutonium processing complexes, decades of radioactive waste. When production ended in the late 1980s, they started cleanup. But there's still enough buried contamination to keep the site restricted for thousands of years. My company contracts with the Department of Energy to provide overnight security for the perimeter zones, the areas outside the hot zones, but still technically part of the federal reservation. It's boring work usually. 12-hour night shifts, driving patrol routes through empty desert, checking fences, making sure nobody's trying to break in. Hanford sits on 586 square miles of scrubland along the Columbia River. Most of it is empty. Some of it will stay empty forever because the contamination is too deep, too widespread, too expensive to clean. You learn not to think about what's under your feet. You learn to trust your dosimeter, follow the protocols, stay in the clean zones. October 31st, 2008, Halloween night. I was running solo patrol on the northwest perimeter, Route 7, which loops through an area where several plutonium production buildings used to stand before demolition. The buildings are gone, but the concrete pads remain, and the whole area is fenced with radiation warnings, even though official surveys show background levels only. I've driven this route hundreds of times. Nothing ever happens. At 2:47 a.m., my dashboard-mounted radiation detector went off. The alarm sound is designed to be impossible to ignore, a harsh, pulsing wail that means you're being exposed to dangerous levels. I looked at the readout, 847 MeV-EHR. That's enough to cause radiation sickness in hours, cancer within weeks. That's cleanup worker in a hot zone levels, not empty desert outside the contamination perimeter. I stopped the truck immediately, checked my personal dosimeter. It showed normal background radiation around 0.12 microsieverts. The dashboard unit was still screaming. Either I had a catastrophic equipment failure, or something was very wrong with the environment outside my truck. Protocol says, trust your equipment, call it in, evacuate the area. I reached for my radio, and that's when I saw him through the windshield. A man in a full hazmat suit, the old kind, silver-colored with a clear face shield and external air tanks. He was walking across the empty concrete pad where Building C used to stand, moving with purpose like he had somewhere to be. At 2:47 a.m., in a restricted federal site, in protective gear that hadn't been used since the 1970s. I grabbed my night vision goggles and got a better look. He was definitely real, solid, casting a shadow in my headlights, kicking up small dust clouds as he walked. But his suit was wrong, not just old, pristine, like it was brand new, no wear, no damage. And he was heading directly toward Building C's former location, toward a structure that didn't exist anymore. I hit my radio. Security Control. This is Perimeter 7. I have an unauthorized person in Restricted Zone 4, Charlie. Male subject in hazmat gear, moving east across Demolition Pad C. Radiation alarm activated, showing extreme readings. Requesting backup and hazmat team. Static then. Perimeter 7. We show no personnel authorized in Zone 4, Charlie. Can you confirm visual on subject? Confirmed. Subject is approximately 40 meters from my position, walking toward... I stopped because he'd reached the point where Building C's west wall used to be, and he didn't stop. He walked right through where the wall would have been and disappeared. Not ducked around something, not entered a doorway, just walked through empty air and vanished. My radiation detector immediately went silent. The reading dropped to background levels, like someone had flipped a switch. Perimeter 7, please repeat. You're breaking up. I sat there staring at the empty concrete pad, my heart hammering. Control subject has... I've lost visual on subject. Radiation readings have returned to normal. I may have experienced equipment malfunction. Copy that, 7. We'll send a tech to check your gear at shift change. Continue patrol. But I didn't continue patrol. I got out of my truck with my flashlight and my sidearm, against every protocol I'd ever learned, and walked toward where I'd seen the man disappear. My personal dosimeter stayed quiet. No radiation. The concrete pad was empty, just cracked and weathered concrete, with desert scrub growing through the gaps. I stood where Building C's entrance used to be. I'd seen photos of this building during my security briefing. It was a plutonium separation facility built in 1944, operated until 1967, decontaminated and demolished in 1995. Nothing remained except the foundation pad and some underground piping that was too contaminated to remove. My flashlight caught something. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading from where I'd seen the man walking to this exact spot. Boot prints, showing the tread pattern clearly. But they stopped right where the building's wall would have been. No prints beyond that point. Like he'd stepped through a door that didn't exist and walked into a building that had been gone for 13 years. That's when I heard the sound. Machinery, deep industrial sounds, pumps running, ventilation fans, the hum of electrical systems. Coming from underground, where the demolished building's basement levels still existed, sealed and contaminated and absolutely not operational. I backed away from the foundation pad, my skin crawling. The sounds got louder. I could hear voices now, muffled but distinct. Men talking, calling out to each other in overlapping conversations. Work sounds, like a facility in full operation. My radiation detector started screaming again. I looked at the readout. 240 ends VHR, climbing. We have 389, 1502, levels that would kill me in hours, but my personal dosimeter still showed background radiation. The contamination wasn't real, or it was real in a way my body couldn't detect but my equipment could. The concrete pad in front of me started to glow, not bright, a faint greenish phosphorescence, the way certain radioactive materials glow in the dark. And in that glow, I could see the building. Not solid, not fully there, but visible. Walls, windows, doors, all overlaid on the empty pad like a double-exposure photograph. Building C, exactly as it had looked in 1960s photographs, operating and occupied and impossible. Through the translucent walls, I could see people. Dozens of workers in hazmat suits moving through corridors, working at stations, handling materials that glowed with that same sickly green light. And they were all doing it wrong. No safety protocols. No protective distance. I watched one worker pick up a glowing cylinder with his bare hands through the suit. Watched another open a container that released a cloud of luminous particles. Watched them working in conditions that should have killed them immediately. One of the workers turned and looked directly at me. Through the translucent wall, through 63 years of time, through the boundary between what exists and what used to exist. He pulled off his hazmat hood, and his face was burned. Radiation burns, skin peeling away, eyes clouded white. He opened his mouth, and I heard his voice, distant but clear. Tell them we didn't know. Tell them they said it was safe. My dash cam was running. Everything I was seeing should have been recorded. I pulled out my phone and took photos. The glowing building, the workers, the man with the burned face staring at me. Flash after flash, documenting something that couldn't be real, but was right there in front of me. Then it was gone. The building vanished. The glow faded. The machinery sounds cut off mid-hum. I was standing alone on an empty concrete pad in the middle of the desert at 3:12 a.m., and my radiation detector was showing normal background levels. I ran back to my truck and drove straight to security control. Didn't finish my patrol, didn't call it in, just drove to the main facility and walked into the control room with my camera and my story. They didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. I showed them my dash cam footage. It showed empty, concrete pads, no building, no workers, nothing unusual except my truck stopping and me getting out with a flashlight. I showed them my phone photos. Every single image was overexposed, pure white, like I'd pointed the camera at the sun. Nothing visible except blown-out brightness. The radiation logs from my vehicle showed the spikes exactly as I described them. 2 separate incidents of extreme readings at 2:47 a.m. and 3:08 a.m. But the site's fixed monitoring station showed nothing. Normal background radiation all night. My supervisor suggested I'd experienced a hallucination, possibly from low-level radiation exposure over time. They pulled me off active duty, pending psychological evaluation and medical screening. The evaluation found nothing wrong. The screening showed no elevated radiation exposure, but they didn't clear me for patrol duty. Said I needed more time. Said maybe private security at federal nuclear sites wasn't a good fit for me anymore. I quit 3 months later. Couldn't go back to Hanford. Couldn't drive those patrol routes knowing what I'd seen. Knowing that Building C was still there in some way. Still operating, still exposing workers to lethal contamination in a loop that had been repeating since the 1960s. I did research afterward. Found records of Building C operations. Found reports of worker contamination incidents, accidents, safety violations. Found death records for employees who'd worked there. Cancer mostly, decades after their service. Dozens of them. And I found one name that matched the face I'd seen. Harold Morrison, plutonium handler, worked at Building C from 1961 to 1967, died of radiation-induced cancer in 1974 at age 38. The same man who'd looked at me through time and asked me to tell people they didn't know it was unsafe. But who do I tell? The Department of Energy knows what happened at Hanford. The contamination is documented. The worker exposures are in the records. Telling people now doesn't change anything. Those workers are dead. That building is demolished. The plutonium they processed is in weapons that were dismantled decades ago. Except the building isn't really demolished. It's still there, operating in some parallel version of 1966, with workers who died years ago still handling materials that are killing them over and over. And once every few years, on certain nights, when conditions are right, it becomes visible, becomes real enough to set off radiation detectors, real enough to show itself to security guards who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I work corporate security now, office buildings, boring stuff, no federal sites, no nuclear facilities. But I still have radiation nightmares. Still wake up seeing that glowing building, those workers with their burned faces, that man asking me to tell people something they already know. Hanford is still there, still contaminated, still cleaning up, still burying its secrets under concrete and soil and bureaucratic paperwork. But some things don't stay buried. Some things echo through time, repeating their worst moments forever, visible to anyone unlucky enough to be watching at the exact wrong moment. I saw Building C. I saw the workers who died there, and I saw proof that some contamination isn't just physical, it's temporal, burning through the barrier between past and present, making ghosts out of people who didn't understand what they were handling until it was too late. The Hanford site cleanup will take 1,000 years, they say. But I don't think cleanup will erase what I saw. You can't demolish something that exists outside normal time. You can't decontaminate memories that play on an endless loop. Those workers are still there, still poisoning themselves, still dying slowly in a building that only exists when someone's watching. And on Halloween night, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest, Building C lights up again. The workers clock in for another shift in hell, and the radiation detectors scream warnings that no one will ever heed, because the damage was done 60 years ago, and it's still happening now, and it will keep happening forever in the ghost facility that haunts the desert where America built its nuclear arsenal. I told someone. I'm telling you, the workers at Hanford didn't know. They thought they were safe. And they're still there, still working, still dying, still asking anyone who can see them to deliver a message that came too late to save them. Some places are contaminated forever, not just with radiation, but with the echoes of what happened there. And Hanford site is one of them. If you made it through all 11 of these Washington State horror stories, you're braver than most. These accounts from the ferry crossings to the nuclear wastelands prove that some places in the Pacific Northwest don't just remember their dark history, they relive it. If you want more terrifying true horror stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Haunted Fears and join our horror family. Hit that notification bell, because trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover next. The darkness is always watching, and so are we.